What happened when a male donor met their child later on in life? So I'm not the dad, but the kid. My bio dad donated his swimmers and gave permission to be identified. Didn't even have to be after 18. I'm counting, because we're not sure if we found all of us yet, that there are 53 half-siblings, all of which are his kids. My full sister and I didn't know we were donor babies until I was a freshman in college and her a junior in high school. It was a few more years before we found out the scope of our family. As such, I never got to meet the man as he passed away in 2018, but I've been getting to know my half-siblings and I'm sad to have missed him. He apparently engaged in annual reunions and was interested in getting to know all of the kids if they and their families were open to it. We all support each other basically by default, even though we didn't grow up together. What's even wilder about him is that he got national coverage for something besides his giant flock of offspring. The guy got married to a woman the day he met her as a competition to be his bride in the Mall of America. It was apparently a heartfelt story, and the two of them had a 20-something-year marriage with 4 kids that they raised themselves. The Mall of America even has a plaque with his name on it, so you can go find him if you really try. The man was a weirdo, but in the best way. He was kind and generous with his time, and really seemed to care about all of his kids, or at least the ones he knew about. I was donor conceived along with my sister, same donor. I had a great dad who raised me and never had any desire to find out who my donor was, but I was always curious about my siblings, especially when I learned there's no legal limit on how many children you can father when you donate swimmers in the US. Well, one 23andMe test later, and the first result at the top of the list is a half-sister in Texas. We got in contact, realized we had a ton in common, and it sparked a fire in her to find more siblings. She took an ancestry DNA test, and at the top of that list was a man in California, listed as father. She got in touch with him right away, and it turns out he's a fantastic guy. He was adopted himself and also got in contact with his birth mum as an adult, so he had been on our side of the situation, and he was very open and willing to talk. His wife has been super supportive of us meeting as well. He has 3, organically made kids of his own. I was especially ecstatic to learn that I'm a big sister. Plus, we've since found 3 more half-siblings who've all been very cool and excited to find each other. At this point, I've met all but one of them in person, and I got to meet my biological grandmother as well. In short, I went from having a dad and 1 sibling to having 2 dads and 8 siblings over the span of a couple of years. It's been pretty cool. A guy I know in his 70s got a call from a guy in his 50s saying, "Hey, I'm your son, and I just learned I have a genetic disease, so your other kids should probably get tested." You know what? Good on that guy for looking out for everyone in his unusual circle. Didn't have to do that. It's got to be an awkward conversation for the 70-year-old though, having to reach out to literally everyone, potentially the dozens of kids he's had. I donated for 6 months in university, twice a week. I gave consent to be contacted. That was close to 20 years ago now. I did call and ask once. My swimmers resulted in 24 successful pregnancies. That was all the office could tell me. I've not done 23andMe or anything like that. I think it's better to respect these people's privacy. My aunts had to get a donor for both children, and he happened to live in the same neighborhood. I can't remember if that was a coincidence or not, but he's a close family friend now. He comes over for their birthdays and other family events. They don't refer to him as their dad, really, only as a joke, but he's very close with our family. My younger bro donated multiple times unbeknownst to me. Years later, my wife and I did Ancestry.com to get an idea of how diverse our backgrounds were, and wham! Started getting contacted by lots of people, over a dozen, saying we were close relatives. At first, I was confused and asked the early ones about their parentage. They all had similar stories. Single mom went to a bank. Didn't take too long to guess what had happened. I called my brothers and asked. Younger one fessed up and said yes, he went multiple times. In fact, they told him he needed to stop donating because there was a statistical probability his progeny could meet and date. At least, they seemed ethical. I asked if it was okay if I give them his contact, and he was fine with it. The weird thing is that they all had his face. Like one look at them and it was obvious who their father was. Anyway, this went on for a couple of years and they all connected with each other. Seems like there's over 20 now, probably more. He's met a couple, but it was all casual. The whole thing is super weird to the rest of the family to have all of these close relatives who somehow are a part of the family, but then again, not really. I was donor conceived. I took a DNA test, his natural-born daughter took a DNA test as well. So really, neither of us gave permission. There are 28 siblings so far. It was quite a shock. I wasn't expecting it and I didn't know. I was 38. I've met the donor and most of the half-siblings. He's a cool guy. I think it's eerie how I see many of my mannerisms in him and the other siblings. I know there's a wide range of emotions for people who experience this sort of thing, but for me it was generally positive. At my job, we did a media interview with a guy who donated at least once a month for the money throughout most of his 20s for nearly 10 years. He recently found out that there's a Facebook group with over 100 women from all over the world that have had children from his donated swimmers. This was an interview about his whole story, not a job interview where it just randomly came up. It was for an internal video made for TV execs and writers to potentially create a TV show based off his story. Okay, obligatory warning, it's not me, but I don't think I'll get another chance to tell the story. An ex-girlfriend of mine had an uncle who'd donated back in the 90s. At some point, he started to reach out to the parents of his biological children to see if they wanted to meet their bio dad, and now, every summer, he flies out all of the children who wanted to be in contact to Yosemite, California for a week of camping. I remember the first and only time I went, I was shocked to know that at least 10 of his kids came every year from all around the US to spend time with him for 1 week. Apparently, the year I went with them was also the year that another one of his bio kids got in contact with the uncle for the first time and spent the week out near Yosemite with all of her half-brothers and sisters. I don't keep in contact with the uncle or my ex anymore, but I can assume that more of his children have contacted him each year so they can spend time getting to know their bio dad. Not me, but a friend of my father-in-law. The guy is 86 and he's been dealing with cancer for decades. He lost the will to live until one day he got a call from his supposed daughter. He was a donor in the 70s, and with Ancestry.com, they were able to reconnect. They were so sweet and have totally involved him with their lives. He has grandchildren that he didn't know about, and an entire family when he thought he'd die alone. It's just a beautiful story. I get happy whenever I hear it because he's such a nice man. Funnily enough, he's been cancer-free almost exactly since they connected. They do say attitude is a huge recovery factor. I'm a child born via donation. At one point in my life, I did tons of research to find him. I also did Ancestry.com and I found some half-siblings, but no donor. But I thought about it more and looked over the records I did have from my donor company. He was a college student at the time and asked not to be contacted. He probably has a family now who may or may not know about his past donation, and my gut feeling is that he did it for the money, so I've decided to let it go. I'm a donor child, but the man did not give permission for me to get in touch. I've always been a bit curious, particularly as we now do the same job, but more about any family history of disease which I think might be relevant, although I assume nothing major or he wouldn't have been able to donate. I think I would have reached out when I was 19 or 20, but I wouldn't anymore if I had the choice. I call the donor my father, but my dad will always be the one who raised me and played with me and loved me, even though he died when I was young. He's the one that matters, but I am grateful to those who donate, enabling my father to have a child without a genetic illness. Donating is indeed a great thing to do for people who can't or don't feel they should have genetic offspring for a variety of reasons, even if the donor's decision is purely financial or they don't wish to be contacted later. And yes, we do have to respect their rights to privacy after the fact. They entered into this under an understanding of certain conditions and would probably jump on an ancestry site if they ever really got curious. Somewhat related, but I've got a brother from another mother and a happy story to share. My dad had a kid with a lady in the 80s. She didn't want to keep it and he didn't want to be a single dad, so he was put up for adoption and they split up and went about their days. There's likely a lot more to the story than that, but I've only ever been told my dad's side, so I'll leave it there. Fast forward 30 years, my dad has settled down and now has a family of 5 kids with my mum. He gets a call from a non-profit asking if he'd provide his information if his kid wants to reach out. He does and goes about his day. Fast forward a few months and he gets a call from his son, initially wanting to learn about possible health causes and curiosity. He ended up getting adopted by an amazing family and doing very well for himself. He wants to come to town and meet my dad. Dad has 5 awkward conversations with his kids, explaining we had another brother and that brother was coming up to visit. Note, a running insult when we were growing up was calling each other adopted, which annoyed my dad a lot. Fast forward 2 weeks, there was a graduation this weekend and we were having all the family over, so it was a good time for him to come up and meet the guy. Great person, we all hit it off and we're still close with all the brothers. Everything worked out pretty good, all things considered. He's the spitting image of my dad and a really great friend. His parents are amazing people as well. Really lucky to have him in my life. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mine may seem awkward. My mum's friend's a lesbian. 10 years ago, all three came up to me and asked if I would donate. Why the hell not? Lovely people and desperate to be parents. After the second turkey-baster insemination, they got pregnant. They have a beautiful little girl. I went on to have my own 2 daughters, and they then came up to me 2 years ago and asked again. This time it was a bigger decision, but my partner knew the full story and was more than happy to allow us to try a second time, which was again successful. They had a boy this time. We've spoken extensively, and we've all got no issue with them knowing that I'm the donor. My kids will also know when the time comes. We agreed that we'd run off the whole "I have no input other than biological" thing, and obviously we won't be able to stop the whole "who's my father" conversation, but we've agreed that when the time does come, they'll be sat down with my own 2 children as well, and have the explanation that I'm not a father to them and that it was purely to allow them to have children and that they aren't missing out by having 2 mums rather than a mum and dad. It's hard to type out, but I'm sure you guys will get it. Thankfully, they look nothing like my own children. That could be awkward considering we live in the same neighborhood. Also, I have no attachment or need to be anything to these kids. That might seem horrible to say, but this was my gift to 2 amazing parents, and they're doing fantastic. I don't need to be there for them. I'm just helping 2 people live the best life they can. I'm a simple man. If I can help someone, I will. Life's difficult as it is. People do good things to help me, and I do the same for others. We should all be helping each other when we can, no matter how big or small the gesture. I was approached by my longtime childhood friend and asked if I would be a donor for her and her wife. I agreed, and they asked if I'd be okay with being in their life, to take pictures and be around so the child knows who I am, and knows I'm a friend and also knows that I'm the biological donor, just so that there's no questions down the road. I agreed, and it's been awesome so far. He just turned 2 and he's a tornado. I warned them, by the way. But he's loved more than most children will ever be. Coming from a background in psych, I figured developmentally it would be easier to be labeled as a friend and not an unknown. Questions of turmoil of where did I come from and stuff, I guess we'll see. I was a donor, and when this happened to me, it was okay. 4 separate offspring at various times over the course of about 6 months contacted me, all just as they turned 18, and records were open to them. It was cool for me to see pictures of them and how much they looked like me. It was also good to hear the stories from their parents of how I helped them conceive a much-needed child, which I really appreciated. But that was all. A few nice, polite emails were exchanged, some kindnesses, and then we stopped emailing. I didn't want or expect more, I'm just glad to know that they existed and they got to connect with their biological heritage. I supposedly, as far as the donor system estimates, have a lot more out there. But I expect that these are the only ones that will contact me, since I assume most of them will want to do it as soon as they can, and all of my donations happened within an 18-month span. A few emails probably meant a lot to them. It showed that you cared, but ultimately recognized that you weren't their dad. I emailed my donor at 18, sent a little biography and some pictures, and said I understood he wasn't my dad, and he responded with, "Yeah, never contact me again, I haven't told my wife and kids," and attached the worst, most faraway picture of himself that he could. There are at least 18 of us kids, and most of us know each other. And the ones of us who were interested in reaching out, maybe 5 or 6 of us, were super disappointed that he was so rude. So from a donor kid, thanks for being kind. You would really be surprised by how much genes incorporate into your lifestyle and even mannerisms. I met my biological father when I was 25 after never meeting or seeing him my whole life. The little things were so weird. We sat in a chair the same way, we nervously bit the skin next to our fingernails at the same time. The first drink I ever ordered was a White Russian because I thought it was interesting. Lo and behold, when we met him and his family, they brought White Russians to the lake because it's their favorite drink. I've kept a $2 bill in my wallet since I was 14 for no reason at all. After we talked, it turned out he had a $2 bill in his wallet since he was a kid as well. Just really weird things as coincidences. I learned in my 30s my brother and I were donor conceived via the same donor. Before I even met him, seeing his Facebook pictures blew my mind. I'd never really resembled anyone in my family who raised me. My brother looks a lot like my mother, and I figured I must take after my older ancestors. When I found my biological dad's profile, I saw my face staring back at me. And when I met him, I learned he shares some of the same hobbies as us that were never explored with our social family. The seed is strong for some of them out there, I guess. The real breathtaking one for me is just how many seemingly random quirks that first account named that seemed to come from biological tendencies. Fascinating. Donor for lesbian friends. Their son doesn't know yet, but knows I'm his godfather. It isn't something that they'll keep from him, though, when he eventually asks. A lesbian couple I was friends with wanted a baby, but all the donors they met were buttholes. In the end, I said, "If you want my baby gravy, I'm fine with that. You guys know me well enough, and it's not like I want kids, so you might as well." They wanted to pay me, so I just said, "Put £10 into the tank of my car and buy me a bag of chips." Strangely, the wee boy was born on my birthday. So that's my dad's girlfriend, me, and this kid all born on the same day. One of my good friends was a donor child. Her parents gave her full permission and access to the donor's information as he consented, but she never cared to meet him or contact him. She'd say something along the lines of, "Apart from his biological role, he has nothing to do with my life." The family had his medical history prior to the procedure to ensure no complications. So, not exactly what you'd consider a donor, but I got an ex-prego, and she never told me. 10 years later, I do a 23andMe DNA test, and now I have a 10-year-old daughter. Scary, but I think it worked out in the best way possible. Also, just for fun, I also donated to a lesbian couple, so I now have 2 contributions to this group. 2 kids under very different circumstances, but they're both taken care of by their own families. I have a friend who was raised by 2 lesbians, but conceived by a turkey-baster party, which, if you didn't know what that is, I didn't either. Apparently, sometime in the early 80s, a bunch of LGBTQ folk wanting kids all met somewhere in a New York apartment. The men, as there were multiple, all splooged into a receptacle of some kind, and that product was then inserted via turkey baster into one of the female partners with the hope that they'd get prego. His mum used to share this story with us, a lot, while under the influence as we grew up. At some point, when he hit about 23-ish, he did in fact attempt to find his bio dad, because he needed to know some things about his genetic health that could really only be answered if he knew the other half. And what we came to was essentially a "who knows" thanks to this. Apparently, it would have been very possible to maybe get a genetics test, but also apparently at that point in history at least, it was a very good chance that that incredibly expensive route wouldn't lead anywhere. So he's fine with just not knowing, at least last time I heard from him. Basically, I'd just graduated college, my girlfriend and I needed some extra cash, and I said, "Well, this is a cool idea. I've always wanted kids, and my girlfriend can no longer have bio kids due to bad endometriosis tearing up her uterus. From a purely biological perspective, I think it was kind of neat that my genes are out there in the world possibly. As for why I said it was fine to contact me, I figured at that point it's up to the kid if they want any kind of relationship, and it would suck to know that someone could knowingly help create you and not only want nothing to do with you, but actively prevent you from learning about them. Anyways, this was about 8 years ago, so remind me in 10 years and I'll let you know if this comes up. By the way, I do have a son. He's not biologically mine, but I still love his adorable butt. My wife had fertility issues, and we looked at receiving a donor egg. When one was lined up, I felt the need to donate my own swimmers as a way of paying it forward. But then my wife became pregnant with her own egg. I feel like our good karma paid off, and our only child will have half-siblings. I regret it, deeply. I'm in my 20s. A family friend had been trying to get pregnant for some time, but was having difficulty as she was single and in her late 30s. Had a good job and everything, but it's a small town and she's not very outgoing. But she desperately wanted a child. So, after a few years of watching her try and fail, I offered to help. Turns out my stuff was pretty potent, and she was shortly after pregnant. What I failed to take into account was that this would also be my first child. But not my child. And as a close family friend, the infant is over at my parents' house being babysat pretty much every day. My immediate family are the only people who know. Her family and the rest of the world are unaware and believe it to be an unknown donor. It was clear from the start that I would never be known as the father to the kid, and I told her I didn't mind either way she wanted to do it. So now here I am, still getting used to it and realizing I've done something I'll regret for the rest of my life, but that's undoubtedly the best thing I've ever done for someone else. Ask some Europeans. Even without permission, kids now have a right to contact their biological fathers due to a new law from 2018. Even if the donators strictly refused this option. A family member of mine did this but didn't give any permissions. A bio child, now an adult, was able to figure out who he most likely was based on genealogy websites, and the child reached out to me since his family member doesn't have a social media presence. I believe he's since contacted the biochild, but the concern isn't this one person, but that it could be many, many potential biochildren in the world out there somewhere. On the biochild's part, they now live on a different continent and appear to be a happy, functional adult who understands the awkwardness of the situation, but simply wants to know more about their biological family. What loophole did you exploit for years to go through life on easy mode? I used to live in an apartment across the road from a casino whilst at university. They released an app where if you checked in, you got points that went towards free food and drinks. Because I was close enough to the casino, I'd just check in without going to the casino itself. Every Saturday, I used to get a free burger, fries and drink and watch sports in the sports bar. They eventually scrapped the app. It was awesome, considering I was a broke uni student. In the late 80s, you could make a long-distance collect call from a payphone and charge it to a private number. The operator would call the other number to confirm. We'd ask the operator to call the number of another payphone nearby, and we'd have a friend authorize the call. Free long distance for almost a year. I used to work at a grocery store, and we had this era of the steak discounts. Hundreds of coupons for $5 off a steak were just everywhere for some reason. I found out that if I used the self-checkout and brought a steak that was less than $5 while using the coupon, the machine would give me back the difference in change. I ate dozens of free steaks and filled my change jar up quite nicely. At my current apartment complex, they just changed the laundry machines, so you needed to use this super crappy slow app. I found out that if you pressed start on the app and start on the machine, and then backed out of the app while it was chatting with the machine would start but wouldn't charge any money. I've been washing and drying for free for a few months. The app's name is similar to Small GS or Small Payments. Arby's used to have a take a survey on the back of the receipt and get a free roast beef sandwich. But when I got the free one, I got a receipt then too. I brought one sandwich and got literally dozens for free over the course of a year or so. I managed Burger King in high school, and they had a similar free sandwich with survey on receipt thing. That wasn't a loophole, it was intentional. Most people who would come in feeling smart for their free sandwich would grab a drink or other item. You'd be shocked at how much restaurants make on soda. The margins are like 500%. I was living near and attending our local university. While working full-time in an economy in the midst of a recession, I barely had enough money to pay the bills, let alone eat. Where I live is very well known for its tourist industry and casinos, so I had quite a few friends who worked in it and would tell me about their massive employee luncheon cafeterias. At that time, there were no ID cards or lanyards to be scanned or checked. All you needed to do was find it and be dressed appropriately to the employer's dress code. After my friend and I did a dry run on one of those trips, in order for me to find it without getting lost, I'd go it alone. For almost 3 years, I had lunch and dinner for free, learning the peak service times and the dead zones. I even got along with some of the cafeteria workers and custodial crews. Something tells me that a lot of these are going to feature students rather heavily, because those poor sons of witches are just so very good at grabbing every free item and stretching every coupon to its absolute limit. Spoken from experience. The thing we clocked in on when I worked at Kmart would round to the closest quarter hour. So by clocking in 8 minutes early and clocking out 8 minutes after my shift, I got paid for 30 minutes rather than for 16 minutes. By exploiting this, I was paid 2.5 hours of overtime a week. Cumulatively, during my time there, this added up to about 6.5 weeks of extra pay. I wasn't ever caught, though. When I was a kid, there was a payphone down the street that if you put a quarter in and made a call that no one answered, it would give you 2 quarters back. I went there all the time and called home when I knew no one was there to answer. I worked out how to get the jackpot every time on Connect 4 fruit machine in a pub I used to drink in. It would cost me about £5 to £10 before you'd get into the bonus round, and then when you did, you'd play a Connect 4 game against the machine. You placed the first counter, then after the machine placed the next counter, you mirrored the machine's move. Every game ends in a draw, and you win the jackpot, which was £50. The pub landlord removed the machine after about 3 months as it was regularly empty, basically paid for my drinking and more for 3 months. I used to work at Redacted Coffee Chain like 7 years ago, and they used to print these receipts where if you filled out a survey, it would give you a 6-digit code, which you could then exchange for a free drink. However, when you gave in the receipt with the code, we'd just toss it in the garbage and then give the free drink. So over a shift, I'd just keep all the survey receipts when people didn't want them, write random numbers on them, then keep a wallet full of free coffee. Since I already got tons of free drinks, I'd just give them to homeless people and explain it was good for a free coffee. I probably gave away like 100. In high school, our PE grade was based on improvement. We took a skills test at the beginning and another at the end, and your grade was based on how much you improved. So once I learned that, I always sucked at the first test and then did miraculously better at the second, so I had a massive improvement and thus a better grade. I got keys to a new flat on a Friday afternoon. The place had electricity, but it wasn't in my name. I went to the electric company just before closing, and the lady said, "Flat 8, you say? We only have records of 7 flats in that building. Tell you what," she glanced at the clock, "come back Monday with the serial number on your meter and we'll get you all hooked up." I never went back and I enjoyed free electricity for over 2 years until I moved out. This was originally a large single-dwelling property that had been converted into flats and apartments. My one, I guess, was a late addition and I was the first tenant. It simply wasn't registered to me or anyone. I went to a sporting goods store and they asked me for my phone number when I was paying. I was in a bad mood and I didn't want to fight with the clerk, so I told them our local area code plus 555-1212, which is the old number for directory assistance. The clerk accepted it and I left. When I checked my receipt, I had a huge number of loyalty points, because apparently a ton of other people did the same thing. I called the office the next day and switched the account to my new address. A half dozen times over the next few years, I went and got free stuff with all the points that I had kept racking up as one of their most loyal customers. Because I was a good student and rarely got into trouble, I was allowed to have my own phone extension to my room. So if I was out past curfew, I'd call home. When my mum answered, I'd say, "It's for me, I've got it," and she'd think I was up in my room. It was 1976. My mum never knew. I know that because I confessed to it years later. She was very shocked and mad, and she tried to ground me. But I was 40 and had my own house by then. My parents were the early-to-bed and early-to-rise type, and my room was a converted attic 2 floors up from the rest of the bedrooms. I often came home after everyone else was asleep because I had a part-time job, so I was used to sneaking in like a ninja. It was a bright yellow princess phone. And finally, I knew I had a sweet deal, so I didn't overuse that technique, just a few times when it was absolutely necessary, like the time we hitchhiked to see Peter Frampton. Haha, my sweet ride is still ongoing. Thanks to a charge card, I was granted top-tier elite status with a hotel chain. I downgraded 6 years ago, but the status remained. The hotel chain went through a merger, but since I'd retained the status for over 10 years, I was given lifetime top status in the new program that was created. My family used to go to this campground in the summer and rent a little cabin for like a week. In the main building there was a little arcade, mostly older games and a foosball table and an air hockey table. What most people didn't know was the air hockey table was broke. If you put quarters in, you could push the plunger to start the machine and then get your quarters back if you did it just right. A couple of years in a row was super fun because me and one other kid that knew would keep the air hockey going for the entire time. The arcade would be filled with kids who'd often play other games while waiting their turn at air hockey. The campground must have found out after a few years though, because one year we went back and it was fixed. The arcade was also a complete ghost town from that point on, and the campground made no money off it after that. That's when I fully realized and understood the concept of a loss leader at like 13 years old. My old job, I worked at a pretty large gym, gold level, like the 3rd highest. The monthly fee was like $79 for the gold membership, but employees got free diamond membership. I worked there for a year and a half before I quit, but my account was never deactivated. Been going there for a while, completely free, still not found out. Diamond membership is like $200 a month. I mean, the whole free factor is nice for sure, but from my limited experience with gyms, that elite status means what? Free coffee and you get to use the poorly maintained steam room? You've got a good thing going. I'm just saying that none of the gyms I've seen with tier systems are worth what you pay for the upper tiers. I used to work for the BBC. They have, as you'd expect, their entire archive digitized. I was working on some cloud stuff, so I needed to access it to check some access rights. This was literally everything ever shown on the BBC, ever downloadable, in a ton of video and audio formats. iPlayer is just a fraction of what was in that archive. It took them about 6 years after I left to remove my account. So 6 years of free access to probably the largest TV and movie database around. For those asking, I used it to mainly watch documentaries. I'm a bit of a history bore, so I'd just search something like World War I and see what popped up. You could download as video or audio. I'd drop stuff out as MP3s and then listen to it in the car. Yes, it was called Redux, and good to see other ex-BBC people who had access to it for years. You had to pay for a TV license in the UK. It's awful to be forced into, but that does mean that there are 0 adverts on the channel, which is nice when you're watching a program. And yes, BBC these days also stands for something else. Hilarious. When Lyft first came out, they were giving away free rides for like $20 to $30 if I remember correctly. All you had to do was refer a friend. So, me and my college roommate just made a few email addresses and somehow my free rides glitched, and I just kinda had free rides for the year. I had free Uber rides for about 2 months due to some other glitch. I felt bad, but then all the sexism scandals came out, so I ordered Ubers from my husband to go to work too. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in college, they had this deal where if you signed up for a free trial of Netflix, you'd get a $10 gift card for Papa John's. They didn't even ask for a credit card back then, just an email. So I'd make up a new email address to use and get a code every time. Not only did I get free Netflix for a while, but I also got a lot of free pizza. I had a killer racket in school where I'd buy the graduating class's used textbooks for like $5 and then sell them to a third-party bookseller in the next town over who'd pay me between $25 and $30 for each one. Eventually people started asking questions and others figured out the deal. Oh well. Parking meters took credit cards, but they weren't actually connected to a live network at all times. The machine just confirmed the card number was valid and not expired, then spat out a valid pass. So, when my card number got stolen and replaced, I kept my old cancelled card. Of course, when the system tried to run the card later, it would be declined. My car and I were long gone by then. Sadly, they wised up and now it charges your card before giving you a pass. I can't believe I got away with it. My mum gave me £20 to buy a big thing of a certain kind of cat food, which normally costs £10.99. Now, here's the thing. When I entered the store, I was given a coupon for £5 off that particular brand of cat food. The store also had a special going for £5 off the kind of cat food that I entered for. I got to the till and the food was priced at £5.99. I handed over my coupon and it was scanned so the food was 99 pence. I couldn't believe my luck because normally it says not for use in conjunction with any other offer. But here's the real kicker. The lady behind the till gave me another coupon, so you can bet your gosh darn life I went around again and left the store with £22.98 worth of cat food for $1.98 with a third coupon in my hand. The only reason I didn't keep exploiting the loophole was because I had to carry it all home on my BMX. Not intentional, but once I found out, I didn't stop. Years ago, I used my card to pay for Xbox Live during a period before I could pick up a manual 1-year subscription. But when I tried to remove my card details, it wouldn't let me and said I had to call MS directly. Being lazy but smart, I decided to just change the security numbers that were saved so it wouldn't process any future payments. And it never did. But somehow I still kept getting Xbox Live access. This went on for about 1.5 years before it stopped. I was never contacted about paying anything for what I'd used either. One week, the local Chick-fil-A put out a coupon in the local coupon magazine flyer, which was buy one, get one free, any item on the menu. Next to that coupon, they had a 50% off any menu item. I carefully checked and neither coupon mentioned cannot be combined with any other offer anywhere on it. So I ran out to the local grocery store and grabbed a stack of these flyers. Sure enough, the next week, the offer was gone, but it was too late to stop me. I spent almost 2 years as a grad student living almost exclusively off of 128-count nugget platters that I'd get for 25% of the cost. First big platter was half off and the second one was buy one, get one free, remember? The place went under new management and they put up a sign saying they'd no longer be accepting these coupons. Not entirely sure if that was due solely to me or if anyone else was pulling the same thing. I had about 20 coupon pairs left when they shut it down. First of all, told you that there would be an overrepresentation of students in this video. Second, although this seems like a younger person's dream as well as being a financial windfall, I do have to wonder what the frickle of those chick nuggies were doing to your body. I mean, good God, that sounds like death by grease. At my old job, we had a vending machine in the basement that gave change back when you bought something. Sometimes it gave you more than you paid. No one used this machine as the basement was being reconstructed, but it was regularly filled. It went on for about 1.5 years, and I don't know what happened to the machine. It was just gone one day. Someone could have caught on, or it could have been because construction was finished. I probably made $500 to $700 in cash back, and at one point I actually had a sack of coins. Part-time retail worker for a big chain. Work gives employees a 5% discount over all purchases, increasing to 10% on store products. Gift cards are store products, so are vegetables and lots of groceries. By paying $45 on a $45 gift card and then using said card for my shopping, I could purchase $55.55 in groceries for an effective 19% discount on almost all of my essential shopping, and 14.5% on everything else. I have on occasion bought a card online on my phone while queuing at the checkout. 4 years strong, and I'm still wondering when they'll realize that they're giving me a discount on money. On the original Kindle, you could purchase a book with an expired card and Amazon would send you the book. A minute later, you'd receive a notification saying the payment didn't go through. You had to select something stating you were aware of this, and then they would take the book back. If you hit the home button, it took you out of the notification and you could continue reading the book, unaware that the payment didn't go through. I did this once a month my junior year in high school. The summer before senior year, I couldn't do it anymore. Coincidentally, my passion for reading died around the same time. My first credit card ever when I was 18, many moons ago. I opened a bank account and they sent me a CC. I used it for just shy of 2 years, all sorts of stuff, my first apartment, which was baller, and I never got a bill. Bought nice clothes, systems, subscriptions, food, you name it. Never got a bill. Went to the bank one day to deposit some money and I asked when my new card was coming. My old one was about to expire and they said, "What credit card? You aren't supposed to have this." They took it on the spot and I never got a bill. Tens of thousands of dollars easily, all for free. There's an app for a local burger chain where it allows you to roll the dice to get a code for a free double patty burger upgrade. It was designed so you could only try it about once per day and even shows the date of the roll on the code so the cashier could verify it. However, I found out that you can just change the date on your phone and try again immediately. If you got nothing, you'd change it back again and just keep going until you got the code. Then when you got the code, you'd change the date back to the current date and the app updates the code so it looks like you rolled it today. I got free burger upgrades for years until they finally got rid of the feature altogether. I don't know if anyone ever figured out this exploit or if they removed it for other reasons. It was only once. I bought a game license on Steam for a game which was on a different launcher. Tried out the game, didn't enjoy it and refunded it. Later I checked the alternate launcher, and while Steam gave me the money back, they never actually cancelled the license at the other company. I got a game with its newest expansion worth $70 for free. It was The Elder Scrolls Online. To be specific, I got the base game and Skyrim when it was literally released just for a few days. 2 from college, not exactly loopholes, but playing the system. Pizza chain had coupons printed on their larger boxes. With 10 coupons, you could get a free cheese carry-out pizza. I used to raid every single trash can of their pizza boxes in the dorms or offer to throw away someone's box for the coupons. I rarely paid for a pizza, but got plenty of cheese carry-outs for free. Campus Paper printed a coupon for 2 free game tokens in the bowling alley and arcade in the student union. Limit of 1 coupon per day. I got a stack of coupons, free campus paper. Twice a week I had to go through the student union for class and was usually with a friend. She was a good sport and the 2 of us cashing in the coupons meant 4 game tokens a day, 8 per week. I made her a pair of earrings out of the 2 game tokens for being a good sport. Whole Foods used to have bacon on the breakfast bar. Cooked bacon weighs almost nothing. I'd get a pound of cooked bacon for $8 and it lasted almost a week. Bacon crumbles for the salad, for the turkey sandwich, and the other 100 things you can toss bacon on. I used this method for almost a year and then they stopped putting bacon out. There used to be a third-party warranty you could get at Newegg that was called Replacement or Refund. It was for laptops that were under $500. The warranty cost like $75 for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, I'd file a claim for whatever small thing was wrong with the laptop, headphone jack, card reader, bad key, stuff like that, and I'd send it to them and they'd refund me for the full $500. Then I'd just buy a different laptop and get the warranty again. I rolled the same $500 for 3 different laptops. I basically rented a laptop from Newegg for $37 per year. I photoshopped a college parking pass to hang in my rearview mirror, complete with a fake barcode. I even had it laminated. Free parking for 3 years, and I saved $250 per year. Folks, if you really want to try this, you're welcome to, but the narrator is going to stress that the downsides of being caught are probably pretty hefty, and could be classified as forgery of college documents, and your car would probably get towed into the bargain. So you'd maybe get a slap on the wrist, or maybe expulsion or charges if you got caught. I've always lived in a different town or city than where I work. I've also always worked in an industry that gives preference to my co-workers who are parents. I learned early on that when asking for time off, I listed going out of town as reasoning that there would be no question or hesitation to grant the time off. I'm rarely ever traveling, as that label suggests. I'm merely at home, in another town. I have one co-worker I've told, but the vast majority have yet to ever figure out the system. When I was an unemployed college student, and before public transport tickets became electronic where I live, I used to cover my ticket in a thin layer of glue, a glue stick, so that when I validated the ticket, the ink would stay on top of the glue layer. I'd then wash the ticket very carefully with water, and the ink would come off. I'd let it dry, and I magically had a brand new ticket. This would last about a week before the ticket started looking too weird. My friend used to restock contraceptive machines in pubs and collect money from them. The machines would always break and get jammed all the time, but because it was Jimmy's, no one would ever tell someone that the machine ate their money. He'd just count how many rubbers were gone and give that amount of money to the company and then pocket the rest. When did someone fail to bring up info that completely blew their case in court? The opposing counsel asked, "Isn't it true that you hit the victim in the face with a brick?" The client said, "Nah, Marcus hit him with the brick. I hit him in the back with a piece of wood." A friend of mine's case is a public defender. A girl was busted on possession charges and told him she didn't have any on her when they arrested her. He thought, okay, we'll use that. Turns out she didn't have any on her when they arrested her because she'd just sold it all to an undercover cop. This particular specimen had sent a photo of his victim's beaten face to them with a message saying something along the lines of, "Do you want this to happen again?" He came across very well in court up to that point, but his mask slipped when that evidence came out. Oh, one custody case. The client failed to tell me he was previously convicted of all sorts of awful things against his family in the past. Lawyer in the UK. I acted for a member of a famous prevert hunting group. My client was charged with various offences relating to his vigilantism, most seriously causing grievous bodily harm with intent. He wanted me to fight the case on a public interest defence point that isn't available to him in statute or at common law, contrary to my advice. I followed his instructions, as I'm bound to do. If the state won't punish the creeps properly, then it's left to men like my client to take the law into their own hands, which I knew was a horsecrap argument for a whole host of reasons. His laptop was seized by the police and submitted for forensic examination. He had a staggeringly huge database of incriminating material on it. He himself, as it turns out, was the worst-case example of the kinds of people he claimed to be hunting. My house was robbed. In addition to all of the stuff the thief took, he also stole a bunch of my suits and all of my neckties. I had a big collection, like 100 or so. However, the thief left fingerprints on a hard plastic box that I kept spare change in. Fast forward 3 months, the thief is caught in the act of robbing another house in the same neighborhood, same detectives on my case, and this new theft. They fingerprint the guy, and the fingerprints match the ones from my house. At the thief's arraignment, I see him stroll in wearing my suit and tie. I tell the district attorney. He says there's really no way to prove that it's mine. However, the tie he chose to wear was a one-of-a-kind street map of San Francisco, and I still had all the documentation to prove it. The district attorney's eyes widened and he informed the judge. The judge has the thief placed under arrest again for possession of stolen property. The thief's lawyer was dumbfounded. It was a nice end to a rough situation. I mean, my goodness, that was a freaking bold move on the thief's part. Even if it hadn't been for the tie, mocking the person you've wronged to their face like that was hardly subtle and is yet another point of contention in their case, especially if the original owner's DNA was all over the suit. A company I worked for at the time was doing due diligence before acquiring a small tech startup. The COO of the tech startup was a well-liked guy in the company, friendly and outgoing, though I'd heard rumblings that he was rather hands-on with the work and with female employees. Apparently there was a walk-away package proposed to the guy that would let him keep a sizable portion of his post-acquisition bonus because a young woman who'd worked in the sales department had filed HR complaints against the COO and obtained counsel. I sat on the meeting with the COO and the company's retained lawyers while they grilled him about his contacts with the young woman. He denied ever having contact with her within the company without multiple other people present. Those people said his behavior towards her in meetings didn't raise any flags. He emphatically denied having any contact with her outside of work. The lawyers asked the questions a half a dozen different ways, and each time he denied any out-of-work contact. Later, we met with the woman and her lawyer with the COO not present. Her lawyer gives us a rather graphic card that came with a bouquet of flowers addressed to her from the COO. The guy had an account with a florist linked to his credit card. When the company retained lawyers confronted him, he said, "But I never had contact with her. It's not like I delivered the flowers myself." He got terminated for cause, so no walkaway package after that. At her request, the woman was given paid time off until after the acquisition and then moved to one of the other companies under our umbrella. Minor traffic cases can be the worst for this, believe it or not, because they're short and simple and oftentimes the client isn't there, so if you get blindsided by something critical, there's often no chance to consult with them to turn things around. I had a simple speeding case. 70 miles an hour in a 55. No big deal. If she goes on a driving improvement course, the court will usually dismiss or reduce those, since her driving record wasn't bad. When I showed up for her, I found out that she'd been driving 70 up an unplowed snow lane to get around all the other cars traveling in a lane that had been plowed because they were driving too slowly for her liking. I didn't even know it was possible to drive 70 on fresh snow. The officer stated had already cut her a break by not writing the ticket for reckless driving, and the judge politely agreed that he didn't feel comfortable reducing it under those circumstances. When I called her up after court to confirm, she did, and claimed that she had just forgotten to mention it. Now, maybe I've lived too much of my life in the South, but it just boggles my mind as a detail you'd forget when hiring a lawyer for that incident. I'd have told her in advance that hiring us was a waste of money, not to mention the hassle of taking an 8-hour class, and that she probably should have just gone ahead and paid this one. I legitimately do that all the time during consults. I give my honest assessment if the case is even worth doing, and so by omitting that detail, she harmed herself for no reason. At least she took it well and didn't get defensive. A friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically, this guy took an AC unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation with no jail time. The judge was ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he'd like to say. The defendant responds, "Yeah, I don't know why they're charging me. I never touched her. I just threw the AC at her. This is bullcrap." The judge rescinded the plea deal because of the defendant's attitude and lack of remorse, who went to trial and got a year in jail. Client said his ex owed him a lot of money and that she was trying to get out of paying him back by getting a protective order against him. Seemed reasonable, so I took his case. At the hearing, it came out that they were never a couple, that he was sending adult toys to her residence on a weekly basis, and that she had never asked for the thousands of dollars he gave her over the years. She was an exotic dancer. We lost, he got laughed out of court, and he learned a valuable lesson. Tell your lawyer the good and the bad stuff before trial. There's so many. My guy in a custody battle where the opposing party claimed that he had a drinking problem, and he denied it 1,000%. Even after the real talk I have with him, asking him not to hide stuff from me and to be honest, we went into court and at cross-examination the opposing party provided video evidence of him finishing work, driving to an abandoned parking lot to drink a few tall boys, and then going to pick up his kid from school. Every single excess visit. He not only didn't tell me that, he forgot to mention that his ex's brother owns a private investigator firm. That frickin' idiot. Our guy filmed his offenses for his YouTube channel. The cops didn't even know. A witness brought it up on day 3 of the trial. It was a nice quick change of plea that afternoon. I was a paralegal. It was a negligence case. The client argued that a lack of streetlights and a cyclist he couldn't see was responsible for him hitting a wire pole. Upon discovery, the first respondent's report indicated that they found the driver in the driver's seat, pants down, with adult material playing on the phone. It wasn't difficult to figure out who was negligent at that point. An employment case. We got to the deposition of my client and everything got set up. The first question was, "Please state your name." The client immediately looked at me and says, "Can we take a break?" We do, and she pulls me out to the hall to tell me she's lied to me about her identity. She's apparently a serial fraudster and has changed identities 7 times since the 90s. She apparently thought that the other attorneys had somehow figured it out, and that's why they asked the question. Oh boy, what do you even do when that comes up? Can you even argue the case and not face some sort of peril when it comes to your law license? It's such weird territory, I'm not sure if I've seen anything this crazy even on TV. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. He swore up and down that he had never filed before. So you can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He had personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered. I'm a court-appointed attorney for qualifying individuals in family matters. Termination of parental rights case. I'd been fighting to argue that the parent was stable, working lawfully, had a suitable apartment, doesn't need psychotropic meds anymore, was ready to be a parent. All the good stuff. After a few months of negotiating with all the parties and Department of Children, court services, we have a pre-trial to try and convince the guardians. I met with my client before the hearing to see if anything had changed. Nope, all good, let's get my kids back. Great. That's not happening on our first day, but let's try anyway. We get to court, and my client, who's kind of hot-headed and quick to anger, gets riled up and goes off on the guardians. Screaming in open court, it doesn't end there. It gets revealed that 1. They're no longer working, 2. No longer in their apartment, 3. Doesn't want to have a relationship with the guardians despite her kids loving them, 4. Won't send her kids pictures of the toys they miss and can't have, 5. Plan on moving out of state, and 6. Thinks they can live as a family off state aid when she gets them back. And she's 4 months pregnant, all in the matter of 15 seconds. I was too shocked to even react. Speechless. My client was working really hard to get everything right and legitimately had everything going for her prior to this hearing. I wasn't making false representations or trying to get a monster reinstated. This was a true bombshell, as I did my due diligence to make sure things were on the up and up and the statutory requirements were met. Things fell apart very fast, apparently. This was very atypical. Parents typically do a really good job working hard to meet their requirements. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The son of the opposing party, and presumably the party themselves, lied about the son being blind to make him seem more sympathetic as a witness. We didn't know either until he took the witness box. Their counsel asked him to take the oath and he picked up the card and read it. That was the cherry on top of a series of ridiculous events. The judge dismissed the whole thing in our client's favor shortly after. I was a trainee at the time, but my boss, who was in her late 60s, said it was the most ridiculous case she had ever handled. I was expecting he easily walked up or sat down, not that he was stupid enough to actually read something out. I wasn't a lawyer in this role, but I was a law clerk. This was a typical divorce case. This particular jury trial was about splitting assets and who'd get what. It was a long, drawn-out case that took about 5 days. Right before the closing arguments, the attorneys wanted to talk to the judge. It seemed as though a couple of days prior, the couple decided to get back together. And instead of telling the judge and their lawyers, they just kept it a secret. We heard 4 days of evidence, arguments, brought in experts such as land assessors, financial planning people, and then it came out they were back together. One of the attorneys asked to be dismissed from the case immediately and walked out of the courtroom. The judge had to dismiss the jury, and the couple was adamant they didn't think that them getting back together was a detail any of their attorneys needed to know. I heard of a guy trying to appeal his disability benefit being revoked. He was supposedly a paraplegic, but the opposition had 10 minutes video footage of him walking, running, and even jumping over a fence. After the 1 minute mark, the judge said, "Okay, I've seen enough. Please leave." It was a credit card theft and fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the 80s, I was trying this guy on a CC case, and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her how she could be so sure it was my client. She looked at my client, who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable, and said, "Because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him." The jury convicted him, and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. My father's a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids, and so on and so forth. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she bent over to try to reach it from her chair. But the pen was too far away, so she stood up, bent over and picked it up, and went back to her seat as if nothing was out of the ordinary. My dad was just looking at her, and she snaps at my dad and goes, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was okay, and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her, and she then started loudly complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her. This has the same energy as a kid remembering to be hurt once they've got their sibling in trouble for hitting them. It doesn't matter if it happened or not, those reactions are so overblown as all heck to maximize parental punishment. You can't take them seriously if you see them. There's this rule you're supposed to follow when questioning trial witnesses, and that rule is to never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Despite this rule, lawyers often ask small, apparently inconsequential questions which are necessary to set the scene, but are so inconsequential or obvious that their answers are fairly presumed. This case was an exception to that general presumption. The defendant was arrested on a warrant and transported to jail. After booking him into jail, the officer returned to his vehicle and discovered a baggie of substances sitting right in the middle of the back seat. The defendant was charged with possession. At trial, the officer explained that he routinely searched his vehicle before his shift started and after any time he transports someone in the back seat. The defense attorney tried to poke holes in the story, but the officer's testimony was remarkably consistent. The officer was fastidious about checking his vehicle. The appearance of substances coincided with the defendant's presence in the vehicle. Then, as the defense attorney was running out of questions, he threw out the question. Was there anyone else in the backseat of the vehicle? It was a Hail Mary. Even when there are multiple arrests, police tend not to transport more than one arrestee at a time if they can help it. There was no reason to believe anyone else could have feasibly been in the backseat with the defendant. Though it's no surprise to you, the defense attorney and prosecutor were stunned when the answer came back as yes. It turns out the defendant was with his girlfriend when he was arrested, and the officer courteously agreed to drive her to her apartment before taking her boyfriend to jail. This fact was not included in the police report. The officer never told the prosecutor, and shockingly, the defendant never told his attorney. There was a palpable pause as this fact sunk in for everyone. Since there was another person in the back seat, there was more than enough reasonable doubt. Proofs were concluded and the prosecutor threw out a half-hearted closing. The not guilty verdict was a given. Because of this case, I learned to never assume a fact no matter how obvious it might seem. So the case was that woman A had hit woman B in the head with a heavy beer pint at a bar, and woman B got pretty serious injuries. The defense claimed that woman A hadn't hit anyone with a pint, but instead had just thrown the pint in a random direction and it happened to hit B in the head. Thus, it was an accident and not battery. Well, the prosecution had a CCTV tape from the bar and it was shown at the trial. And the tape clearly showed in glorious high definition as A walked behind B and smashed the pint to her head so hard that the pint shattered on impact. I looked at the defense lawyer and his jaw almost literally hit the table. The prosecutor also noticed this and asked something along the lines of, "So, thrown, huh?" And the defense lawyer said that due to technical difficulties, he couldn't get the CCTV tape to open on his computer when he was reviewing the evidence. Woman A was found guilty. So yeah, I was completely dumbfounded. My father was working as a fraud investigator for an insurance company. He's got a few stories, here's two of them. A guy was claiming theft of multiple items, but mainly a ring. Things weren't adding up, so my dad and the insurance company's lawyer decided to do a depot of him. Guy shows up and is doing the depot when my dad notices the guy's wearing the exact ring he's claiming was stolen. My dad slid a note to the lawyer telling him the guy was wearing the ring, and once the note got slid, the guy realized what happened and put his hands under the table and took the ring off. They asked him to stand up, and lo and behold, the ring fell to the ground. Another guy is claiming a break-in and theft. Immediately, things weren't adding up as the window was broken out instead of in. The guy submitted Polaroids of items he claimed were his, like TVs and such. Thing is, in the Polaroids you could see the reflection of the store they were in on the glass. He also claimed numerous CDs and records, but oddly enough, every single one started with an R, S, or T. We're talking hundreds of CDs and records. My dad was about to deny the claim in person, but noticed he had a weapon on the table, so decided to do it over the phone. Ready for an escalation? Later, the same guy was arrested for beheading a working girl and throwing her head in the river. Oh, the one I saw was simple. Now you put it that way, maybe I did hit the car. Simple is good. This one was the start of the end of my marriage. My husband lost his job in the title and mortgage business. Applied for unemployment, got denied. I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them to fire you?" He says, "No, absolutely not. They fired him out of nowhere." The hearing day comes, he testifies under oath that he did nothing wrong and was a good employee with no issues. Upon cross-examination, the other attorney pulls out documents from one of his real estate closings. Documents that he forged and backdated. He had to admit he perjured himself. Needless to say, he didn't get unemployment and he didn't sleep at home that night. I was about to complete a land transaction which required my client to have built a road. Indeed, the entire point of the transfer was the road. My client, as I called him prior to completion, said, so it kind of turns out we, didn't build the road. God damn it, Paul, you had one job. This is the sort of statement you make when you were meant to bring snacks for a party, not when you're involved in an expensive land deal. Like, did the contractor run off with the money, or was the client just that grossly disorganized? This was my mentor's case, and the reason you never ask questions that you don't already know the answer to in court. During the trial with the judge on a divorce matter, the wife brought up that he had physically attacked her during the course of their marriage. Client whispers to my mentor that's absolutely not the case. On the stand, during his portion of the testimony, my mentor asks, "At any point in the marriage did you lay hands on your wife?" He says, "Oh, only one time. We were having an argument and I held her down on the couch until she stopped arguing with me." What? My mentor said it was like he could see it happening in slow motion and all the alarm bells were going off in her head because he had never mentioned this and apparently to him, this was completely fine. The judge gave the wife a lot of money as a result and the husband was baffled. My mentor was fuming. The husband admitted this was the only time he had laid hands on her. My mentor was more angry because she had thought the case was in the bag, since the wife had abandoned the kids with her husband to run off with her lover down in Florida and literally only came back to the state to get the divorce done. The husband had been noted as being a great dad to the kids and a good figure in the community, hence why she was so damn shocked at his answer. I went to court over a ticket. A lady was in front of me for a DUI and hit and run. The judge assigned a lawyer for her since she was so shook she quit her job. The judge asked the prosecuting attorney for details on the case and she legitimately says, "Oh, you mean that car I hit while I was drunk?" The judge stops. He took his glasses off and said, "Everything is recorded in this courtroom. I told you not to talk to anyone about your case except the attorney that I assigned for you." You could tell he was ready to walk out of the room with the level of stupidity this lady showed. What's the wildest info that a student dropped when asked a fun fact about themselves? I teach middle school and this one still takes the cake. He said that his mum and dad have the same parents. I asked him to clarify because I didn't understand what he was saying and he said, "I only have one set of grandparents, they had the same parents." I quickly moved to the next student so no one else would realize that this kid just told the class that his parents were siblings. I talked to him about it the next day in private and he said that he got it mixed up. His parents don't have the exact same parents, they shared a dad. I felt so much better when the mum called me to let me know her elderly stepfather married her husband's elderly mother after they were born. Still weird, but much better. I had a student tell me that sometimes his dad got drunk and asked his mum for things. As I was starting to tell him to stop and that he didn't need to elaborate any further, he continued with, "Like soup?" and then he yells it, like, "Soup!" It took every bit of restraint not to laugh. It's been years and years since that happened, but I still laugh whenever I think about it. Not a teacher, but this happened when I was 17 at school camp during a bonding exercise. The teacher said, "Tell us 2 truths and 1 lie about yourself, and we have to guess the lie." And this one weird kid went, "I like PlayStation, I like Doritos, and I'm an alcoholic." The teacher said, "Oh, well, the lie is clearly that you're an alcoholic." "Got ya, I play Xbox." My gosh, the look on that teacher's face. In my public speaking class at a community college, we had to get up and do a speech about an experience that really changed our lives, or an important memory and how it made us who we are. On the first day, a guy who was a veteran volunteered to go first. He proceeded to talk about the day he was captured and a victim of the unspeakable act by an enemy soldier and how he now goes around and helps other soldiers with the Wounded Warrior Project. It was difficult for anybody to follow that. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. "My arm is effed, y'all," in the deepest southern drawl, and proceeded to wildly swing his effed up arm around. He was 12 and had Erb's palsy and also got detention that day. He might be one of my favorite students. Not a teacher, but I just did a first aid course. During introductions, say your name and 1 fact about yourself, etc., this one dude said proudly that he had over 300,000 of unpaid parking tickets. Is that possible? Isn't there a certain point where you just get arrested? Not that I think you should enforce that much debt on people. Surely their car should have just been impounded long before that. Once we were going around a circle during percussion camp in the front ensemble, and my teacher goes, "Hello everyone, my name is Paul and I've crapped my pants as an adult." That was definitely one of the weirder ones that I've heard. I just said my dad steals cars. It was something my parents always told us growing up as a joke. The teacher just laughed and said, "That's nice, sweetie." A student told me that there was a chapter dedicated to him in dental surgery textbooks because of a very rare disorder that he had as a child. I might still have that essay. My brother had something like this. When he was somewhere around 9 or 10 years old, he'd had to have 12 teeth surgically removed. He just had too many growing too quickly. It was so crazy that the oral surgeon apparently negotiated a deal with my father. The surgeon would completely pay for my brother's surgery in exchange for taking a couple of extra x-rays and lots of photos, to be published in an academic journal of some sort. During French class, a guy in my class said that he liked stabbing children. He meant that he fences, but didn't know the exact translation for that. During an introductory activity for my new class, a boy aged 9 got up and said, "My dog has to wear a cone on its head because Dad had his bollocks cut off." I was an ESL teacher in Indonesia, and a student once told me every morning she cleaned the doo-doo on her bed. I asked her to clarify, worried that she had a serious digestive issue. She answered, "I brush my teeth, wash face, and clean bedsheet." Her accent made the word sheet sound like a different word. A kid in my kindergarten class said, "My pee-pee fell off at Disneyland." I did not ask any follow-up questions. Not a teacher, but a few years ago on the first day of school, this kid in one of my classes casually answered, "I have a restraining order on my dad." That's actually a smart move. Now everyone in class knows that his father can't come and pick him up. "My dad clogged the toilet this morning and that's why I'm feeling frustrated," said a 5-year-old child. I will say the question was, "How are you doing this morning?" but I could barely keep from laughing out loud. I have IBS. My toddler once told visiting friends that, "Daddy takes long poops." I mean, I was having a flare-up and had some extended bathroom sessions, but dang, little dude, not cool. I'm terrified and amused about what he might share at school in the near future. I'm not a teacher, but I was a helper in a middle school classroom. A teen who seemed uninterested said with no hesitation that she could chug an entire bottle of beer. She got expelled later that year for keeping substances in her locker. I'm not a teacher, but this guy in my class named Shane has this medical condition that causes him to grow tons of hair at an early age. Full beard in middle school. He'd say, "I'm Shane and I'm very hairy." A student once told my wife that her daddy had a very special device that he had to blow into to start his truck. We did one of those 2 truths, 1 lie bits. A girl stood up and said, "I've never been out of the country. I'm a twin. I love playing sports." I knew this girl beforehand, and she didn't have a twin, so I picked that one. Nope, she had a conjoined twin that died in utero and had to be surgically removed, and she's now missing the last vertebrae on her spine. Showed us the scar and everything. Apparently the lie was the first one, as she had been to Mexico. I had a student say a really similar thing. They said, "I really like reading books. I had a stroke 3 years ago, and I'm a triplet." This was the first few days at a new school for me, and his twin sister was in my class, so I was like, "He's a twin, right?" "Nope, they're triplets, but his brother's in a different school because he's incredibly smart. This kid was in a special program 1 day a week because he was smart too, so his brother must have been a genius." His sister just sat there like, "Yep, one brother's a genius and the other's brilliant, and I'm just me." She was a fantastic kid but had a lot of self-esteem issues for obvious reasons. The lie was that he liked reading books. True that he'd had a stroke as well. I teach ESL, and every lesson we start the class by sharing something good that happened to us over the last week or so. Needless to say, kids share the most random things ever. I have many weird stories because of that. We enforce a rule that they need to share good things so they don't start one-upping each other over whose grandma had the worst death. And one day a student said, "I was riding my bike over the weekend when I fell." I could see where it was going, but didn't have enough time to try and enforce the rule when he just spat out, "I fell over a wired fence and cut my neck, and it just kept gushing blood. A lot of blood." I reminded him that we were only sharing good news when he said, "It's good because I'm still alive." I had a good laugh and agreed, but the damage was done. Every kid after him wanted to share about the most horrific injury they had or witnessed. A kid shared that he'd been to juvie multiple times and was currently on probation. Then he pulled up his pants enough so that everyone could see his ankle monitor. That was something. Not me, but my brother. He told the class, "Last night my family ate beaver for dinner." I was much older and had left home by this point. The class laughed and the teacher accused him of lying. The principal was brought into it and my mother had to go in for a meeting. She chewed them up one side and down the other because we had a cousin who was a trapper and he had sent a batch of beaver thighs for the family to enjoy, and although my brother was telling the truth, he told me later that he did say it for the effect of disrupting the class. Well, is it weird that now the narrator is just kind of wondering what beaver tastes like? And no, not that kind, you preverts. I'm genuinely curious about the actual animal in this story. I mean, you're killing them anyway, why not eat them too? My friend is really quiet. He doesn't really talk unless talked to. He's really cool though and has some things he enjoys doing. Literally second year I knew him, the teacher asked him to drop a fun fact about himself, and he said he's a professional bowler with a 300 best, and I was like, why haven't you told me this? That's amazing! I guess it just never came up. I knew him for a whole year and I never knew that. Had students, aged 11, sharing strategies for dealing with difficult emotions, one at a time in a big circle. One girl talked about digging her nails into her face whenever she was feeling stressed or anxious, and I had to explain to the class that that was not a good coping strategy. When I was in my first year at university, my law and society professor made each student get up, say his or her name, and tell why they picked law school. Well, a guy got up, said his name, and the professor interrupted him by asking, "Are you related to X?" And the guy said, "Yes, professor, he's my grandfather." Then the professor got excited and started talking about what a great guy X was, and that he hadn't heard of him in years. Then the professor asked how he was, and the student replied, well, he's dead, sir." The whole class was trying to hold in their laughter. It pretty much broke the class on the first day. I'm not a teacher. This person who told the story was in a class with me as a young adult. Someone in a class told everyone about how his grandparents were arrested for keeping a bunch of adopted children in cages. He said that he used to play with the kids when he was young, but he was too young to understand that the conditions they were in weren't normal. They kept kids in cages and in locked rooms for years before they were discovered and arrested. Yeah, that was a fun fact. I've had my hand up a sheep's bum. That one shocked me slightly. Child of a farming family, helping with lambing season. I was in one of the first small required classes for my teaching degree, and everyone in the class was studying to teach. It was day 2 or 3, and we were doing a get-to-know-you activity where we shared something about ourselves. I don't remember the exact question, but it had something to do with what do you regret or take back. A guy came in late, when almost everyone has the answers to the question, and the professor asked him the questions, and he thought for a moment and said, "I regret letting my friend talk me into dropping A." The class was silent for a good 20 seconds until the professor said, "Maybe next time we only share things that are legal." I hadn't seen him in any other teaching classes since. I still laugh about it to this day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In the context of having students introduce themselves one by one to a new boy in a small high school class, a girl said that her parents got her a nose job and a chest job. That's a two-way tie for me. One was, "I have 2 thumbs on this hand," and "I'm raising cockroaches in my closet to sell to the reptile shop." My dad had a student tell him during the fun fact question in detail about how his goldfishes died that morning and how he experimented on their corpses. He had pictures on his phone of the skin off and the intact skeleton next to it. He's a successful taxidermist now, so silver linings, I guess? My first year as an earnest and ideological teacher in a very rough, underserved area. I got all the students in a circle on the first day to talk about what we'd done that summer. I pointed to a student who had been engaged with me before in class and said, "What did you do this summer that could inspire us?" His answer was, "I did the last 2 months of a sentence for stealing a car." Okay, so I hadn't expected that. I pointed to another student and said, "Okay, that's great, let's talk about what you did this summer." "Yep, I had such a good summer. I went to camp and..." Let me stop lying. "I did the last 2 months of a sentence with that guy because I stole a car with him." Okay, mine was actually cute and kind of funny. I was teaching 5th grade and this kid, white as paper, goes, "My name is blank, but you can call me LeBron." He had an obsession with LeBron James, and I did in fact call him LeBron whenever I wanted to get his attention. Great kid. I'm a teacher from the UK, form tutor to a Year 7 class, 11-year-olds. To get to know each other on the first day, I had them take it in turns to say their name, which primary school they've come from, and an interesting fact, like favourite food or colour. We get to the last kid in class, and his fact was that he had 6 fingers in one hand. Coolest kid ever. That's like my brother. He was born with 6 fingers on each hand, but he had them removed as a baby. When he found out at around age 10, he got so mad because he could have been really cool and really fast at typing. I taught elementary school in the past few years. One kid told me he was a dragon when he was born, but changed into a human as he got older. He was absolutely convinced and couldn't be persuaded otherwise. Okay, so I had psychology back in the spring semester before COVID hit, and I sat next to a girl who I was good friends with from high school. Professor asks her for a fun fact, and she said, "I like to watch people get cut open." She obviously said it for effect, but she cleared it up by saying she liked watching videos of people getting plastic surgery because it was satisfying to watch. Someone shared that when he wiped in the bathroom that morning that there was blood on the toilet paper. Huh. Introducing ourselves around our 10th grade social studies class, and my intro went, "Hi, I'm Katrina, I'm blah blah blah, and I really like trees. Like, I swear I have a tree fetish." The teacher gives me a what the frick look and goes, "Okay," and quickly moves on. I confused that word with the word obsession. Still weird, but holy smokes, I did not mean to say that I was attracted to trees that way. Not a teacher, but on the first day of 9th grade, we had to form a circle and say one thing about ourselves that we thought was unique. When it was this guy's turn, let's call him Mike, Mike stands up and says in a really serious tone, "My mum and dad grow," the word for green herb. His house got raided the next day and his dad got arrested somehow. "I know a lot about medieval torture equipment." Is it possible to be fascinated about the subject matter and not be a serial killer in the making? I guess maybe you could just be channeling it into something really alternative in the bedroom, I don't know. Even though I'm a professor, nothing that's ever been revealed by this question has ever been as awkward or uncomfortable as the occasion that happened when I was still a student. This was when I was in my MFA program for creative writing. If you've never been in an arts program before, it probably won't surprise you to learn that they can attract some weird personalities. It was the first day of a fiction workshop, and the professor decided that he wanted us all to share something interesting about ourselves. And for some reason, one girl, Ashley, decided that this would be a good opportunity for her to tell us about her long history of substance use and the equally long period of mental psychosis she went through as a result of it. She didn't do this as a quick answer either, but as a long, drawn-out list of every single substance she had ever experimented with, followed by a catalogue of every single delusion she had suffered as a result. The only one I can remember now is that at one point she became convinced she was a millionaire and that her family was hiding her money from her. All of this was delivered in a monotone monologue with her eyes glazed over that lasted at least 5 minutes, which was met at the end with a long, awkward silence before the professor said, "Well, that definitely was something interesting," and then moved on to the next person. I was teaching a 10th grade honors English class once, and this pleasant young woman busted out the C word. I hadn't had any trouble with her whatsoever, so I was a bit shocked. The whole class went silent. I told her she couldn't use that word in class, and she was confused as to which word I was referring to. Finally, I said, "The C word," and she repeated it and then admitted she didn't know there was anything wrong with it because her parents use it at home all the time. The rest of the class let her know it was bizarre that she was using it. Not a teacher, but a guy in a handful of my high school classes used to always say he met Ron Jeremy if the class was doing 2 truths and a lie. He wasn't lying and would always show the class the picture they took together. I tried to make conversation with a 6th grade boy who didn't have any friends in my class. I asked him what music he listens to, and he said, "Mukbang soundscapes." If you don't know, mukbang is when people eat a ridiculous amount of food in one setting. It was weird. I don't ask for a fun fact, but on the first day I always ask, "What's your most recent obsession?" Low stakes, building affinity networks, stuff like that. In my first semester, a student said, "air," as in, oxygen. I'm a student, and a kid in my class said that he loves chicken nuggets and then sat down and didn't say anything to anyone else for a month. I have so much admiration yet confusion for him. I have 17 piercings, but only 6 are readily visible. One guy who said, "I love," and then he said the R word. Sometimes I do it, sometimes me and my friends like to get together and listen to people doing it. Some of my favorite R-worders include Tupac, Dr. Dre, Eminem, Biggie. My favorite grape song is English wasn't his first language. He had us in the first half, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a trainer at a bank and I've learned some really interesting things about my colleagues doing icebreakers. One guy used to be in a pretty successful metal band. Another one can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 2 minutes, and yes, I made him prove it. One woman was a professional pianist for a while, and another can read tarot cards. I'm seriously thinking of putting on an employee talent show. One of my students said, "You'll think less of me if you Google me." You know, I remember one kid using this question as an opportunity to explain that he believed in the flying spaghetti monster. I'm not a teacher, but first day of high school when we did introductions, one of the popular girls said, "Hi, I'm Macy, and I'm trash. No, wait, I'm fan trash." And then proceeded to explain that she read smutty fanfics to every and any of the teachers that asked what fan trash was. We were 11, British high school. As a follow-up to the question being asked, teachers that put everyone on the spot like this? What the frick? I mean, it's mostly a thing of what can I attach to your name to make you stand out against the 200 other students that I'm teaching this semester? Also, it's a good way to burn 20 minutes of a class period when you don't know how much you should prepare for your lesson yet and you want to save going over the syllabus for a bit later. The first day of Intro to Literature during my freshman year of college. When asked an interesting fact about myself, I said, I refuse to bungee jump. Slightly confused, my professor took the bait. He replied, "That's sort of random. Why do you refuse to bungee jump? Is it a certain fear?" To which my reply was, "To be honest with you, sir, a broken rubber brought me into this world, so I'm going to make damn sure one doesn't take me out of it." Luckily, the professor was a chill guy. The entire class exploded with laughter, and it was a good time. After a winter half-term, the teacher asked us all, "How was your break?" My class got silent for a few glorious seconds, and when it was my turn, I said, "Well, my granddad died and my dad got married." Yes, in that order. My teacher asked my mum if it was true at a parent evening a few days later. "Sorry for the response you got, Mr. Moore." My friend, when asked this question, said that tickling his pickle was his passion. I had a student who had an identical twin brother 2 years younger than him. His dad was a pro athlete who had the money to freeze an egg after the embryo split. His wife then carried both at separate times. I had an in-depth conversation with an almost 6-year-old about being a secret werewolf hunter at night. The student described how they tracked and often made friends with werewolves. Also demonstrated a stunning amount of knowledge about the moon. And for folks wondering about the vibrant lying, this is very typical for young students and one of their relational avenues for assessing adult reactions. And imaginative storytelling is an important developmental trajectory. At certain points, children start telling stories that they themselves know aren't true, which can be super annoying, and is also a wonderful window into a particularly complex part of cognitive development. He shared the fact that he had a TV in his bedroom. He was 17. I think his name was Carter. He stood up and said, this was in college by the way, "One time I did the deed with a girl in the bathroom." He was expelled. What's your worst story from the "throw him in the pool, he'll learn how to swim" parenting style? I had never gone camping before I was 11. I really wanted to go with my 10-year-old cousin. My parents took me to the woods and handed us the tent and a half-full bag of ranch Doritos and like a pack of bratwurst and my 7-year-old sister. Then they pulled off, leaving us to camp for the first time alone in the woods with a 7-year-old. It was not a fun weekend. I never went camping again, but it was apparently fine because that's how my dad and uncle learned. I'm just grateful for the lack of serial killers and black bears. My dad was notorious for the rub dirt on it method when I got hurt as a kid. When I was 9, I was in a nasty motorcycle accident out in the desert. I broke and misplaced my fibula. The bone was protruding from my leg. My dad didn't want to end his desert trip early, so he told me not to look at it and keep trying to walk. I was in so much pain anytime I'd move, I'd black out. My brother was so concerned he urged my dad that we should go home. My dad finally gave in but was so drunk he let my 11-year-old brother at the time drive us out of the desert. He was so nervous he hit so many bumps, and each bump I'd black out and then come to again. Once we got home, Dad thought it would be best to sleep it off before going to the hospital. The next day, I was admitted to the hospital and my dad was taken into custody by CPS. My dad, when he decided to give me driving lessons when I was a teenager, which turned out to be a driving lesson, singular. He took me to the parking lot across the street from our house and had me tool around to get used to the steering and pedals for about 15 minutes. Then, annoyed that I wasn't catching on fast enough for his taste, he decided we should go on the actual road and I'd learn faster in a more challenging environment. Cue him barking orders to speed up, slow down, hit the brakes, in an increasingly frustrated voice as I tooled along, terrified that I was going to hit someone. The culmination of our lesson came when he noticed we were low on gas and told me to pull into the gas station. Keep in mind, my sum total of driving experience at this point was about 25 minutes, which did not include parallel parking. I pulled into the gas station and came at the pump at something like a 30-degree angle. He grabbed the steering wheel to correct and actually yelled at me, "Jesus Christ, don't you know how to drive?" To which I said, "No, I don't. You're teaching me, remember?" He drove back home silently. That was the end of Dad's driving lessons. I signed up with a driving school after that. The narrator has done videos on helicopter parents before, and honestly, I don't know which of these sets is worse. At least the helicopters can occasionally make the excuse of caring too much. Lots of these ones just come across as not wanting to parent. I should also warn you all that some of the following stories get pretty dark. Doing trauma surgery, a mum decided she needed a nap and told her 15-year-old daughter to drive. Mum survived, the daughter didn't. First and most painful organ harvest I ever did. Cliff jumping. 20 foot up, a girl's dad pushed her, but she hesitated and tried to stay up there but slipped. Landed on her back on a boulder from 15 feet and then the water. "You probably just killed her," I said, jumping in to do a rescue. Luckily, our lifeguard group was there doing practice rescues and even had the board. How she survived with just bruises is a miracle. Search and rescue pulled her out the rest of the way. Not my story, but my mum's. She developed a phobia after she was thrown into the pool as a kid to learn how to swim. At the age of 70, she still doesn't know how to. She's terrified of being on the water, even in a safety vest. Then some fake clairvoyant told her she'd die by drowning. So we spend our summers in the mountains as far away from water as possible. I was scared of the deep end, so my dad threw me in. My cousin parked an inflatable mattress in the corner I was in immediately. My parents supposedly yelled at him to move, but he didn't. I don't know how long I was under the mattress for, but I was spitting up water and choking when I came back up. I was maybe 6 at the time. I got stung by a bee and my mother was convinced I was faking. At the point I started to struggle to breathe, she finally irritatingly relented and made me walk to the hospital using my baby brother's stroller the entire way. When I got there, the staff were horrified, sometimes mortified apparently. They rushed me in to give me an epinephrine shot, and luckily that did the trick. Many months later, a bee got into my bedroom and my father called me a wimp for coming and getting him to deal with it instead of dealing with it myself. You have to learn to deal with these things sometime. Or I could just ask someone not allergic to bees to come and safely deal with the bee instead of risking hospitalization. And yes, I agree that my parents were terrible and negligent for more than just this one single incident. I've been no contact for about 20 years because of the way they treated me as a child. I have countless incidents like this from both of them. This one just stood out at the time I was replying. My younger cousin, who was 4, was a climber and always needed help getting down. His dad told his mum to leave him. He'll either learn how to get down himself or he'll stop climbing. My cousin ended up climbing onto a roof, falling off and getting impaled on a fence pole. One very expensive trip to ER and he now has a cool scar on his thigh. I hurt my arm playing football during break at school. I was sent home by the school nurse. My dad said it was fine, bandaged it and sent me to school the next day, only for them to send me home again within an hour. My mum made my dad take me to hospital and my arm was broken. My wrist had split lengthways and was in casts for 9 months. I was secretly buzzing, to be honest, because, well, that showed him, the idiot. My father-in-law decided that when his first child was born that he and his wife would not go to the baby when it started crying in the middle of the night in order to teach him that crying doesn't get you anything in this world. Turns out, newborns need to be fed every 2 hours, so it's a good thing my mother-in-law ignored him and went to their newborn son, otherwise he might have died. My parents gave me this advice and I shut that right down. They also wanted me to set the baby down and leave her to cry. She's undersized and gets pretty cold pretty quickly. And then they asked me when I'll let her stay with them overnight. Like, you aren't getting her at all with your outdated advice. Ignore them, she meant bullies. And don't show a reaction. When they're bored, they'll stop. This was completely false. And you wonder why I hate going to school so much, mother. It's not a wonder that when I went to secondary school, I made a motto of, don't stand for anyone's bullcrap. I went through too much of that crap for anyone else to do the same. Ironically enough, there are studies that state that the trauma of childhood bullying goes for the rest of one's life, so I'm pretty much set. When I got my very first period, then my family made a trip to the pool the next day. My mum shrugged it off and told me, "You don't bleed when you're swimming," and never said another word about it. I spent the entire time taking trips to the bathroom. I was volunteering at a parent-child zoo day and saw a few parents like this. The zoo had some free-roaming peacocks, and it was awful how many parents didn't tell their too-young-to-know kids that those things can be mean. So the little toddler goes, "Wow, pretty bird," and tries to get a closer look, only to get chased and attacked by this thing while the parents watch. Most of them said something like, "You should have known better." Like, how if you never teach them? The child can barely walk. You expect them to remember that some animals have a strong territorial sense? And then your baby gets terrorized by this thing that's bigger than them and looks alien for all they know, and you don't even give them a hug. See also that one mum that we had to kick out of the zoo because she was encouraging her kids to antagonize the llama in the hopes that it would spit on them. Yikes, people. Have some empathy for tiny humans who trust you implicitly with their well-being. When I was about 5 or 6, I was very sick with a flu. Fever, vomiting, sweating, congestion. It was awful. There was some mix-up at the pharmacy and they thought I was my father and gave him adult medication, basically these giant horse pills. Now, normal child medications for things like this are syrups and chewable stuff for obvious reasons. My dad came home and told me I had to take these meds. I had a hard time getting them down, almost choking a few times. He got frustrated and literally started shoving these huge pills down my sore throat with his angrily shaking fingers. I started crying. My nose was stuffed so I could only breathe through my mouth. I remember his wedding ring banging against my teeth, my eyes watering, gasping for air while looking at my mum for help. Eventually, I coughed it back up, crying and my throat on fire. I remember my mum demanding an apology from my dad who just said, "Well, he's going to have to learn to take pills like that sometime anyway," and he stormed off. Damn, I haven't thought about that story in like 20 years. Well, honestly, I wonder how you haven't thought about it because that's some childhood trauma stuff right there. If you're ever wondering whether you're doing the right thing for your kid, and part of your current situation involves you literally ramming a prescription that isn't for them into their throat, the answer is probably not. This is awful. My stepmom walked me, my sister and my brother, all between 10 and 12, deep into the woods and left us there to learn survival skills. We all thought we were out on a hike when she distracted us and ran away. We wandered into camp hours later. We knew how to get back, but searched for hours worried something had happened to her. She was drinking margaritas and smirking. My dad and I once witnessed someone who literally did this to a little 3-year-old girl. The little girl was just playing at the edge of the pool, happily minding her own business, when Dad ran up behind her, picked her up and tossed her, screaming, as far as he could into the deep end of the pool whilst yelling, "Time to swim, honey." At first, my dad and I didn't react, because my dad has done this to me as a game. I learned to swim first. But then we started to notice she was struggling to surface while her dad just watched. My dad nervously asked, "Can she swim?" To which the guy just shrugged and said, "She'll figure it out." I've never seen my dad book it so fast to get to the water as I did that day. He quickly got the kid out of the water and started screaming at the guy about what kind of idiot he was, while the girl was just bawling her eyes out. I swear my dad was ready to deck the guy. This was back in the 1990s, so we didn't have a cell phone to call the police with, and we never saw them again after that. It was the first time in my life I'd seen insane parenting, and to this day it freaks me out that some people will still do this. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. 2 days after I graduated high school, I came to an empty house. All of my stuff was in a U-Haul because my mum and stepdad moved without me. I've been financially independent ever since, but a heads up would have been real nice, guys. My real dad wasn't involved in this situation. He was on the other side of the country. I'm still close with him, but he's very low income, so he couldn't help me that time. I went no contact with my mum for about a year, but she weaseled her way back in. I think I see her in person every 2 years, and I don't acknowledge my stepfather exists. I've been considering going no contact with my mum again recently. I actually used to be a swim teacher in college teaching private lessons in people's backyards because of parents who'd thrown their kids into the pool to sink or swim. It was usually mums calling me for help because they heard from a friend of a friend that I was able to teach their kid and get them to like the water again in about a month or less. There was this one 7-year-old kid. I had to sit with him on the pool deck the whole first lesson and bring buckets of water to him, because his dad had dunked him multiple times and insisted that his son would just figure it out eventually because that's how he learned. Needless to say, he was never home when I was there. The mum had me come while Dad was at work. 4 weeks later, she had me come later in the afternoon, so he'd come home towards the end of our lesson. His dad saw his son swimming and cried happy tears. He had no idea I'd been there 3 days a week for a month. My favorite student was a 70-year-old man who wanted to do a triathlon but never learned to swim because his dad threw him as a child. It took about 3 months total, a lot of hand-holding on the steps and shallow end, but he finally achieved his goal and I got to cheer him on at the finish line. I still remember how each of my students clung to my arms and clawed at my neck in their first lessons. I never dunked or forced anyone out of their comfort zone. My lessons had to be customized for each student to keep it fun and relaxing. The trauma in their eyes was the haunting part. It stayed with me, and I never force anything on my kids that they aren't ready to do. It's about trust, not force. I am learning from these stories that some parents would rather not have a kid than a kid who has to learn things. My parents told me they were kicking me out at 18 in a move to motivate me. I was in college, no job and virtually no money. My grandfather had left me about $10,000 in savings bonds that I asked for, but they wouldn't give me either. So I made a plan. I went to about 5 different Targets and shoplifted about 4 or 5 video games that I took to GameStop to sell. Stupid and wrong, I know. And at the end of the day, I had about $600. I was planning on buying some green herb to sell to get some income going till I got on my feet. But when I got back to my house, a cop was waiting for me. My parents ended up cashing in my $10,000 to pay for the lawyer. I was always a picky eater growing up. One time my mum sat me down with a small bowl of almonds and told me I couldn't get out of my seat until I finished it. I insisted that I hated them and they were making my mouth itch. She thought I was just being difficult. I started to swallow the almonds like pills because my mouth was so itchy from chewing them. A couple of years later, I saw an allergist and discovered that I was in fact allergic to tree nuts. My mum's whole parenting style was sink or swim, but funnily enough, she did literally toss me into the pool as well. The summer between 1st and 2nd grade, my family moved somewhere with a pool. My mum was adamant that I had to learn to swim as a baby, so she bought floaties for my younger sister and refused to buy any for me because I already knew how to swim and you're too big for floaties. When I refused to get into any part of the pool I couldn't walk in, my mum called to me from outside the pool and promptly grabbed me and tossed me into the 6-foot end. And surprise, I didn't know how to swim. I remember splashing twice, hearing my mum yell at me to stop panicking, and then I went under and tried swimming to the surface like I'd seen in movies, and eventually got my head a bit above water, coughed out a bunch of water, and started screaming for help before I went under again. My mum told me to stop making a scene and swim towards the edge. I made it to the edge and couldn't pull myself out of the pool, so she yelled at me to swim to the shallow end. When I tried to grab onto the edge to just pull myself to the shallow end, she kept taking my fingers off the edge and yelling at me to stop playing and just swim. When I finally got to the shallow part, my mum and family just went, "See, you still remember how to swim? You never forget." They threw me in the pool, I drowned, and needed CPR. They let me use my floaties after that. "Stop crying or I'll give you a reason to cry," is something my dad used to say to me. It would send me into a panic. I was upset and didn't know how to stop crying, and then hearing that would make it worse because now I'm crying because my dad was mad at me, and if I didn't stop crying, he was going to make me cry even more. My dad actually did throw me in the pool to see if I could swim. They didn't want to teach me to tie my shoes because my mom said, "I had to learn that myself, so should you." My in-laws were like this with their kids. So when my husband and I started dating, I got to teach him how to eat without grasping his silverware like a toddler, showed him an easier way to tie his shoes, taught him better hygiene, stuff like that. He was able to do everything on his own, but it was very clear that he'd had to figure it out on his own and no one had bothered to teach him or help him at any point. Just in case anyone wanted an example of how adults who are metaphorically thrown in the pool actually end up further down the line. Also, I used the term throw in the pool to describe those who think kids can magically self-teach themselves everything, but my god, there are so many who do it literally. That ain't right. At age 4, my father decided that my sister and I should learn to tie our shoes. He made us stand there for hours, trying to do it, crying. We just weren't quite old enough. Every time I asked my parents to explain anything as a kid, I was told either, "You're smart, you'll figure it out," or "You just don't want to do it." Any attempt at maturity was met with either flat-out laughter or being told that I was too young to worry about it. Cue me turning 18 and suddenly I'm expected to be an adult, get a job, pay taxes and all that jazz. I asked where in the heck do I start and they got angry because apparently I hadn't figured anything out. Wonder why, guys? I was at the beach one time and it was hot out. I couldn't walk on the sand without sandals on. I heard a cry and looked up to see a little girl standing barefoot on the sand, not more than 2, screaming for her dad, who was 5 feet away, who just told her to stop being such a little wimp. I just about had a rage stroke and ran over to pick her up myself, but he eventually did. When I was 11 or 12, 2 kids from the neighborhood got into a street fight. Kid 1 clearly got the best of Kid 2, and 2 was crying and went home. That should have been the end of the story. Kid 2's parents met him at his front door and sent him back out there to continue the fight. I'm not sure if it was about honor or what, but it was painful to watch. My mum forced me to drink milk. She just thought I hated healthy stuff and only preferred junk food. The thing is, I always loved veggies, but I also like junk food. Basically, I like any food except milk. I just couldn't consume milk. It would make me chuck up, and then I'd have sudden acid reflux, not being able to handle it. She thought I was acting to escape, but I just hated it. Turns out I was lactose intolerant, and my mum still thinks I'm making it up because she can't let go of her ego. Oh, let him touch the fire. He won't do it again. 3rd degree burns for life. Thanks, Dad. 7 years old. Had an asthma attack at our camp in the middle of the night. At the time, treatment for an attack was a nebulizer machine that required electricity, which we didn't have at our camp. My parents kept telling me that I just had to calm down and breathe better so the attack would go away on its own. They only intervened hours later because they couldn't sleep because of all the noise I was making as I choked and gasped for air. We drove 3 hours back to our house, passing multiple hospitals along the way, because they were embarrassed that I was in such bad shape and blamed me for just not breathing properly. Fun times! I still have asthma, but it's been well managed for years now. I take Zenhale every day and Ventolin as needed. I've been no contact with my mother for over a decade. I'm still in contact with my father. They divorced in my early 20s. We aren't close, but I still find enough value in the relationship to keep talking to him. He isn't actively cruel like my mother was, just lost in his own world, I guess you could say. I feel sorry for him that he hasn't managed to overcome his own demons the way that I have. Overall, I'm happy and healthy now. I have a lovely husband, and we've created a good life for ourselves. I do have CPTSD from the years of mistreatment I've lived through, but therapy and proper medication have helped tremendously. The actual pool thing. I was a lifeguard as a high schooler. Some parents did this to their 5-year-old. The parent thought the kid was fine because he wasn't splashing around. He was bobbing up and down with his arms going straight up and straight out. That actually means they're drowning. I had to jump in and grab the kid, who had swallowed significant amounts of water, then call an ambulance to check the kid out. Parents didn't want us to call the ambulance, but we told him it was the ambulance or the police, because what he did could be considered child endangerment. Dad was losing his crap, screaming at me, a 17-year-old girl. The owner of the pool saw this, and he, a former Navy dude, got up in the dad's face. The parent was banned from the pool for life. To this day, I'm convinced the guy was completely hammered. What drama did you uncover when you hired a private investigator? My mother's dad walked out on my mum, my aunt, and my grandmother when my mum was just 5. A few years later, my grandmother died of a grand mal seizure. Mum was taken in by her grandparents, but she always wondered why her dad left and what became of him. In her 40s, she saved up a bit and hired a PI to track him down. Turns out he moved over time from Pittsburgh to California, where he wound up in prison for armed robbery and some other violent crimes. He died in San Quentin Penitentiary. I think Mum got a lot of closure for that. She was able to see that life would have most likely been even worse if he had stayed. At least living with her grandparents, she was loved and raised to fulfill her potential. My grandmother's first boyfriend after my grandfather died said he was a retired cop and a veteran. They enjoyed dancing to country music together and bought a new car in her name though, even though she can't drive anymore. My uncles hired a PI. Turns out that old jerk had a habit of shacking up with widows and bleeding them dry. The boyfriend, not the PI. My sister, who's in her mid-30s now, is adopted and hired a PI to find her estranged biological father. They came back saying that not only was he still alive and nearby, but he had a daughter, meaning she had a biological sibling. Further digging from the PI uncovered that they weren't just similar ages either, they were exactly the same age. The evidence suggested that my sister had a twin and her birth father had taken the twin and vanished. Huge, life-changing news. Eventually, through more incredible detective work, the PI realized that the daughter was actually just my sister. There was no other sibling, and they'd just been investigating my sister the whole time accidentally. Needless to say, we asked for the money back. In short, sister hired a PI accidentally investigated her. I was a private investigator for a bit. Most work PIs do is searching financial or court records and serving documents. But one time I was paid by wealthy parents to stake out their college senior who'd stopped returning their calls. They were worried about her. Those parents paid like 40 grand for round-the-clock monitoring just to find out their daughter dropped out of school and was a full-time ski bum. By the way, stakeouts are mostly just sitting in your car reading all day. My parents hired a private investigator to find out who my online boyfriend was when I was 13. The PI came back and told them he was just a fat 13-year-old. Huh. You know, as much as I think parents shouldn't meddle too much in their kids' social lives and relationships past a certain limit, I do think some concern from them was warranted. They could rest easy knowing that this wasn't a 56-year-old weirdo. When I met my wife, she seemed to have a normal, modern family. 2 mums, 2 dads. Over time, it became apparent that her stepdad wasn't around so much. Holidays, birthdays, you name it. He'd pop in to say hi, grab a nap, whatever, and take off again. My wife's family thought this was normal, just the way it had always been since they were teenagers. He claimed to have a job following FedEx trucks around the state to prevent theft and substance trafficking. But I thought it was strange and started making jokes about him having another family. Well, I guess it got my sister-in-law thinking because she got a favor from the PI at her law firm. Sure enough, he had not 2 but 3 wives around the state and 5 other stepchildren between them. My sister-in-law breaks the news to her mother, who immediately changes the locks and files for divorce. They never speak again. Cold turkey. The divorce was even uncontested. As an FU, they also sent the report to his other wives. To answer some of the questions I'm getting, yes, polygamy is illegal, but I don't think it's really worth prosecuting except to make an example of people. I don't know if my mother-in-law was his first wife or not. I do know that one of the wives had been married and divorced him between their marriage. How does it happen? Counties don't exactly share marriage certificates. His families were pretty far from each other. Was their wedding legal? No idea, I'm not a lawyer. Probably the separation was just a formality for paperwork purposes, which is why it went to court, why it went uncontested, and why he never showed up again. I think he reached out about it once or twice, but she never answered the phone. And if he ever showed up again, we weren't told about it. My mother-in-law is a strong, independent woman of faith who just didn't know. He fooled his stepdaughters for 15 years as well. My grandfather hired one. He was separated from his brother when the Japanese occupied China. My grandfather safely made it to Hong Kong and eventually to Canada. His brother made it to Singapore or Malaysia, according to his family friends back then. So my grandfather spent a good 5 years or so working with a PI to find his brother so they could be reunited. Sadly, with just a picture and the fact that many people died in the war, it wasn't much to go on. My grandfather is still alive and always thinks of his brother. It's his wish to see him one more time. And to let you know, he worked with the PI many years ago, say between 1999 and 2004, and maybe a few touch points here and there over the years. Grandfather was disheartened because he made so many trips to Asia over the years thinking, this is it, but it just cost more money and got his hopes up. No clue if the brother married, if he even made it to Singapore or Malaysia, and those are just the 2 most likely countries. He could have ended up literally anywhere. Not sure if he's even still alive. He'd be in his late 80s now, estimated, and Granddad hasn't spoken about it directly with me, just my mum, who's his daughter. If I'm being honest, we haven't exactly encouraged him to continue to search either. All of my aunts and uncles tell him to move on and enjoy his time in peace rather than in constant yearning. I don't have the status in the family to overstep my mum and her siblings and start bringing up the past or asking him to consider a DNA kit. If I do, I'd have to do it in secret and consider the emotional investment my grandfather may make. He's not living unhappily by any means. He has a great life and is quite accomplished with raising 6 kids to have families and homes of their own. We each take care of him. He has tons of friends, likes to cook, uses WeChat to talk to anyone and everyone, travel and read. He does want to see his brother, but as time goes by, the memory and drive becomes more faint, and eventually the day-to-day life just makes it easier for him to accept the circumstances. I hadn't heard from my mum since I was about 15, very unstable due to substances and alcohol, stuff like that. When I was 29, I decided it was time to find out what happened to her. I figured if she was a Jane Doe somewhere, then I could put her to rest, and if she was alive, then I wanted to let her know that I forgave her. Hired a PI to help. I guess she was moved by my story, and she also ran info for the man my mother was apparently married to, on the house. And with one clue from his report, I was able to track them down. They were alive and just starting out on recovery after being homeless and addicted for many years. I wouldn't have found my mum if it wasn't for the PI who kindly ran an extra report for free. Mum has remained sober now for about 7 years and is probably the healthiest she's ever been, physically and emotionally. My story's a little different. I had a PI investigate me. About 6 years ago, I became very ill with a variety of issues that left me quite poorly. I was an optician, and so using my hands with arthritis was just never going to be a plan. So I applied for a UK disability support. I sailed through and started receiving a monthly amount. Now, fast forward a few years, I then started getting restless at home, so I retrained into a job that didn't involve my hands. I stopped receiving the money, except for the benefit you get while you work. I used it for paying a better automatic car off. Well, my very nasty mother's friend saw me start work and called the benefits office, assuming I was still claiming. Unfortunately, she exaggerated and told them I was living a normal life and even running daily. So the benefits office filmed and watched me. They thought they had a aha, gotcha moment. Their PI provided photos of me walking unaided. When I sat in the meeting with a lot of smug fraud officers and my solicitor, I felt sick to my stomach. I really couldn't work out what the frick was going on. They were trying to make it look like I'd been running and jogging, but I knew I would never walked any further than 5 meters to my car. Anyway, my solicitor pointed out the photos were screenshots of a video. Asked for the video. Videos were of me struggling to walk. In one of them, I rested on my car before opening my door. In another, I was going to the supermarket and had replaced my cane with a trolley to lean on it. You get the picture. So the fraud team basically said, "Whoops," and I never heard from them again. I spend a lot of my time trying to appear normal, and it bit me in the butt. Never trust these fraud TV shows now, either. And for those asking, I no longer speak to my mother, so I'm not sure if she's still friends with that lady. That lady did it because, quite honestly, I think she's brainwashed into thinking that anyone who claims benefits must be scummy. And I'm doing well today, thank you for asking. I started methotrexate last year, and it seems to be holding me quite steady. How unbelievably scummy to try and tamper with evidence to try and make it give off impressions that were just blatantly false. You'd think maybe the best PIs would be paid to find any results, not just to fabricate them themselves. And yeah, your mum's friend is a C-word. I know somebody who was like an assistant to the actual PI. She basically went to bingo with a camera in her purse to capture video of a woman. The woman claimed that a car accident had completely immobilized her, but she'd take off the neck brace all the time, playing bingo hours on end. Nothing exciting, just capturing fraud. Wait, she took off the brace to play bingo? Yeah, man, you've never played hardcore bingo before? I had a girlfriend that worked for a PI for a while. She said that the majority of their work was insurance scams. She took a lot of pictures of guys who said they were hurt on the job, playing golf and surfing and such. There seems to be a lot of that here. Sometimes I wonder if I'd be able to pull off such a scam, because any investigator would only be able to determine that after the accident I didn't post my life on social media, and I almost never engaged in strenuous activity outside the house, so no change there then. In his 20s, my significant other hired a PI to find out what had actually become of the childhood bully who had made his life hell and who had vowed to kill him. Actually, he did try to bring a loaded weapon to school, but some other kid ratted him out, and the bully got expelled, but still lived in the neighborhood for a few more years and beat up my significant other every chance he got. The PI found the bully living in a town more than an hour outside of the big city, in a dead-end job. He'd been arrested for assault and public drunkenness a couple of times. That info helped my significant other get past his fear that the guy would find him someday and make good on his threat. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Had a babysitter that we thought was stealing with us. Luckily, our neighbor was a PI couple, and they ran a background check for $10. The babysitter had a string of DUIs, and a few days before a large fine was due, my camera disappeared. He also stole money from my kids' piggy banks. He sort of disappeared, but was also really into Instagram, so I surreptitiously followed him. He started babysitting again for a single mum, an easy target I guess, and posted a lot of fun pics with this family. I tracked down the mum and sent her a long email detailing out his whole scam. She said we were right and it was clear he'd been stealing from her business. He's since gone underground, but I still Google him regularly to see what he's up to. He's been able to avoid arrests for a while now. I used to work for an insurance defense firm years ago. Best PI story I have is where we hired one to tail a guy who was suing our client for an injury that wasn't entirely our client's fault. The guy was refusing to settle and was insisting on going to trial even though he offered a fair sum that would have paid his medical bills. The PI we hired got some good pics that showed the plaintiff was nowhere near as injured as he claimed. But the crown jewel of the photos was one where the guy was walking on a pier with a woman who wasn't his wife. He had his hand on her butt and everything. Later in a deposition, the attorney slid the picture to the plaintiff and said something like, "Mr. Smith, who's the woman in this picture? We'd like to schedule a deposition with her as well." The guy went ghost white and told his attorney he wanted to settle. At least he was smart enough to realize that if his wife found out the other woman was going to be deposed, he was going to have to get a family law attorney as well, because the divorce papers would soon follow. And to clarify some points here, no, this is not technically blackmail. Our firm had the PI follow him to see if he was faking his injuries, which is standard operating procedure, not to see if he was cheating on his wife. We had no idea he was doing that. The fact the woman in the picture was his mistress was irrelevant. The attorney could have asked for the person's contact info even if she was just a friend, co-worker, cousin, whatever. The attorney wanted to depose her to ascertain the extent of the guy's injuries. At no point did the attorney say, "Drop the suit or we'll put your affair out to your wife." Even in 2020, I struggle to picture a private investigator as anything other than a man in a beige trench coat and a trilby. I used to work in the office of a PI firm that specialized in insurance fraud. I'd edit and sometimes write surveillance and background investigation reports that were passed along to our clients, mostly lawyers and insurance companies. One thing that never failed to surprise me was an astounding number of people who claimed to suffer devastating disabilities regularly posting pictures or videos of themselves running marathons and building decks in their yards. I'm comfortable saying that at least in half a dozen of the cases I handled over 2 years, our clients flagged their claimants as fraudulent because of social media. Disgruntled exes are another significant source of tips, by the way. To give an example of one of the more remarkable insurances in which social media saved a case, it's summer, and on the day of surveillance, our investigator sees the claimant and his family loading their car with beach stuff. The claimant drives for a couple of hours before the investigator eventually loses sight of the vehicle. Side note, tailing someone in a vehicle without 1. Arousing suspicion, or 2. Losing the vehicle is hard. The investigator, being way too far from his own home to drive home, checked into a motel. The next morning, he checked his phone and found the claimant checked in at a water park on Facebook. The investigator makes a pit stop to buy some swim trunks and a beach towel, drove to the water park and got hours of covert footage of the claimant swimming in a wave pool, going down water slides, picking up and putting down his kids, and generally doing a whole lot of things you probably shouldn't be able to do with a serious spinal injury. In short, if you're going to commit insurance fraud, stay the heck off social media. People are so dumb. I'm paranoid that if I even do anything like play a video game on my sick days in bed, that I'm going to be in a meeting with my boss the next day about it. I can't imagine just blatantly showing off your delinquency this much. My mum's best friend. She divorced her husband and was awarded full custody of their daughter. His family was a crap show. He kidnapped his daughter, and he and his parents just disappeared. This was easier in 1977 than it is now. She tried hiring a PI but couldn't afford one, so she started learning how to trace people on her own, in the days before the internet. She spent years doing this whenever she wasn't waitressing. She did find her daughter in 81, but by this time her daughter was poisoned against her. Mum's friend went on to get her PI license and was a PI specializing in women's issues for the next 2 decades. I don't know what happened to her after that. If she's still alive, she'd be in her 80s, I think. One of my jobs is to search for long-lost relatives, usually several generations ago. Typically, the case is about old plots of land where I should track down their owners or their heirs to update the land registry because a state wants to build something there. Let me tell you, the amount of information you can find on Google and in public records is astounding if you know where to look. I know someone that hired a pet detective to find their cat, and he frickin' found him. My little brother hired one to find his dog. He was living in LA, and his complex let the dog out by accident. Small dog, some mutt of toy breeds. He searched by himself for 2 weeks, and he was devastated. My folks found this guy in Indiana, who was like $3,000 to hire, but he guaranteed that he'd find the dog or he wouldn't get paid. My folks and I chipped in as well as my brother couldn't afford that. The guy found my brother's dog inside a day. That was wild. On the other end of the PI spectrum, I was in a bad car accident 13 years ago. I was rear-ended at a red light by a lady going 45. Most of my injuries were soft tissue damage minus the TMJ. That essentially means that up to the present day, every morning my hands go numb, it takes 3 days to clean one room, and I can't braid my hair. Various other numerous tasks that take me way longer than any other normal 41-year-old. Sometimes you have to do things because you still want to feel normal, not like you're a 90-year-old woman. So fast forward 8 years, finally had my day in court to see if I'd get my $90K in damages. They show camera footage from 4 years prior covering 3 whopping days of me pushing a grocery cart, carrying groceries, and talking on the phone. Apparently, that's enough to determine that you're fine. My good friend was only raised by her mum growing up, who'd always tell her that her father had walked out on them when she was a baby and that he'd never wanted anything to do with her. My friend took it really hard and struggled through her entire childhood believing that. But then a couple of years ago, she hired a PI to see if they could find him again. Well, they did, and it turns out what her mother told them was a lie. Her dad is seriously one of the sweetest and soft-hearted guys I've ever met. He left because my friend's mum forced him out when he uncovered her infidelity. I guess he wasn't actually her dad, because her mum cheated on him while they were together. But he loved her like she was his own, and only avoided contacting her because her mum convinced him he legally has no rights to her child. And even worse, she threatened to accuse him of mistreating her and her daughter if he reached out in any way. Thankfully, my friend is an adult now and she's moved out of her mum's house, and she can have the relationship with her dad that she always wanted. It just sucks she had to go through the effort of hiring a PI to achieve that. My dad hired a PI in the mid-90s in Eastern Europe to find out if one of his business partners was stealing from him. Instead, he found out his own brother was stealing from him. He refused to believe the PI and his brother robbed him blind. Took a huge amount of money and left him with gigantic debt. He still forgave his brother. My work requires us to hire PIs to investigate injury claims. We had this high schooler claiming a head injury so severe that he couldn't live a normal life. Specifically, he had an issue with bright lights, couldn't stare at a computer or TV too long, and our PI caught him on several occasions at the movies, arcade, basketball games, so basically he was making a fraudulent claim. Not mine specifically, but my mother hired one to spy on the school. See, my little brother is dyslexic and has severe social anxiety and was struggling a lot in the public school setting. He had an IEP, which the teachers and principal were insisting was being followed. But every day my brother would come home in tears shaking because he felt abandoned and stupid. So Mum hired the investigator, and sure enough, the teachers were basically just ignoring my brother. They'd sit in the back of the room and demand he do his work, and then wouldn't help him through it. Then they'd yell at him because he didn't do it. Again, he couldn't write because of the dyslexia. With all the evidence, my mum was able to arrange a meeting with the school board and threatened to sue. They agreed to pay his tuition for a private school that was supposed to help. It didn't help, and Mum just ended up pulling him out and homeschooling him. He's been doing a lot better. So homeschooling can be the right choice if it's made in the interest of actually getting your kid the right sort of education for their needs, and not just to hide them away from members of the opposite gender or to religiously brainwash them. Lesson learned. My dad hired one. You see, my mum got around a bit. I could have told him myself, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and he wanted hard evidence anyway. If I remember right, it was 5 different guys at one time. One might have been the crystal dealer, but he might have come later. It had been a while and there was a lot to keep up with. The PI was like, "I'm sorry, you really got your money's worth with what I found." I had my dad's back twice by telling the guys that she was married and that we all still lived together. Pretty entertaining breakups were my immediate reward, and not having to go with her to watch her date guys behind my dad's back was the long-term reward. Turns out, Dad doesn't have any bio children. I hired one because he was suspicious his stepdad was being unfaithful to his mum. So he asked me, and I put him in contact with the guy I knew. Bit of a backstory, the stepdad was 5'10", 160 pounds, and my friend is 6'2", 235 pounds and ripped. At 15, when my friend's mum and stepdad started dating, my friend gave the typical, "If you hurt her, you're dead" speech. Also, his bio dad walked out on him and his sister when my friend was like 4. It took a while, but my friend warmed up to the guy, and he's a good guy. Took my friend and I to a 49ers game once, which was pretty cool. Anyway, the PI said he wasn't cheating. Apparently there was a house on the market that my friend's mum wanted, and he bought it. He'd been remodeling it for some time, and he kept it a secret. As a 5-year anniversary gift to her, he bought it. Anyway, they live in a 5-bedroom house now. What is the weirdest cause of death you've heard being diagnosed in a body? I'm in the medical field, so I've heard firsthand of some bizarre causes of death. One was a bee sting to the inside of a lung. The woman accidentally inhaled a bee and it stung her. Apparently, she was allergic. Took a week to figure it out. Another one was a bullet to the chest and ruled a homicide, except he had been shot 3 decades earlier. A small piece of shrapnel from the bullet wasn't removed when he was shot, but he was completely fine for 30 years. Then it found its way into his circulatory system, close to his heart, and made its way into the man's right ventricle and caused a heart attack. If I recall correctly, the man who'd shot him was sent to prison for a few years and released, but was subsequently arrested and charged with murder. Double jeopardy doesn't apply here, I'm assuming, because the person would have been charged with attempted murder or something when he shot the man, and the victim survived. But when he ended up dying, it changed the charge to murder. And the man with a very weird special interest who put a live eel up his butt, and it tore a hole through his large intestine. He died. Did an internship at the office of the chief medical examiner. A guy had decided to finish things in a river by wearing a backpack full of rocks. He was found soon and didn't have too much bloating or stuff due to the submersion. Upon examination, he had a lung infection where his right lung had disintegrated into green liquid. We removed about 1.5 liters of green fluid from his chest cavity. His left lung was fine. It was determined after looking at his medical records that he'd been to the doctor's office 5 times before he self-deleted and that this infection had been going on for almost a year until it got this bad. Numerous doctors had overlooked it. Accounts from those who knew him suspected that he had decided he didn't want to be alive anymore to stop the pain. My friend is an autopsy tech. Apparently it's not uncommon for cats or small dogs to eat the hands and faces off dead or incapacitated owners. His worst was an elderly woman who was paralyzed but not killed by a stroke, and her little dog ate all of her exposed skin before she was found. He did her autopsy after she died several hours after being admitted to hospital. Working in a nursing home and rehab, Guy essentially died from pooping. He pushed too hard, blood pressure dropped, and that was it for him. You aren't going to die from pooping, viewer. There's a lot of ongoing discussion about why people with bad hearts, limited cardiac output, and damaged vocal cords die this way. Vasovagal syncope is totally boring from a medical perspective. I don't even treat it. If a normal person faints from pooping, their heart kicks back in like it should and they keep on living, so you aren't going to die. These medical videos are always the most uplifting to do. Now all of us can go out into that big scary world reassured that we probably aren't going to number 2 ourselves to death. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Had a client charged with murder for essentially getting into a shoving match with a guy. No external bruising or scratching, no evidence of trauma anywhere. They opened his head and found a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Turns out he had a ton of booze and smack in the toxin report. The substances had constricted the blood vessels and driven the blood pressure up, and the booze had thinned it all out. When he bumped his head, slumping back, that was all it took and he blew out and was dead in less than a minute. Really sad case. I was a security guard at a hospital in Alaska. One of my duties was to bring deceased people to the morgue, so I had a key to it. Got a radio call that some patient's wife wants her husband's wedding ring back. I assumed that it would be on a deceased person. I went to the morgue to look for it. I looked all over, there was no gold ring. I even opened the coolers. There were no bodies. I then looked in the fridge. Body parts and a little igloo cooler, so I look inside the cooler. It looks like very old banana peels. I glove up and pull some of them out. Turns out this guy had gotten his hand shredded in machinery. I had to get the mangled ring off his mangled hand, clean it off, and go give it to him. Okay, so not dead body, but similar levels of weird, especially when you're just a security guard. I'm a friend of a coroner's assistant. He spent a few months there. He said his craziest experience was when a man came in, apparently expired. He was a little vague about how the guy ended up on his table with the coroner, but I'll chalk it up to being early in his career. He starts to do a standard Y incision on the torso, and then stops early on. He noticed that the guy had slightly active vitals. He looked at the mortician present and says, "Oh, frick, this guy's alive." They determined the best way to resuscitate him was to do an adrenaline shot. Now, apparently he was declared dead but had something akin to pufferfish poisoning induced to his body. Anyway, he came to, screaming like a maniac and with his chest partially sliced open. He described the whole thing as surreal. My girlfriend was a mortician, specifically for cases of self-deletion. All such cases in the state got sent here. An elderly woman with schizophrenia came in after managing to swallow her severed right arm from the elbow down, and getting halfway through swallowing the other severed arm, again from the elbow down, before dying of blood loss. These injuries were self-inflicted and there were no power tools in the room. At the time of the examination, the first arm had already been partially digested. The arms were whole, they had large bruising and rough cuts, however, it was considered a self-deletion due to her mental state. It appeared she had managed to tear off or chewed through her arms, but she would have died of blood loss far before managing to jam them down her throat, so to this day I wonder how she did it. If I didn't see the look on my girlfriend's face the next day, I honestly wouldn't have believed it. I was a police officer and helped with a case where there was this guy in his 50s who died laying on his couch. He had told his friends he wasn't feeling well for a couple of days and figured it was from some cardiac-related event. Nope. Are you ready for an irrational fear? Guy had undiagnosed hemochromatosis, or high iron, that destroyed his liver. His ongoing cirrhosis and the liver's inability to process blood as fast as it was being pumped caused varicose veins in the lining of his esophagus. This was a decades-long process. One day, one of the more esophageal varices ruptured, and the guy slowly bled to death through his digestive system while thinking he had a stomach bug or something, only to die taking a nap. Get regular physicals, folks. I'm an apprentice funeral director, but we had an autopsy tech come to my school once to do an autopsy demonstration. He was asked this very question, and this was his answer. Male, mid-50s, presented with jaundice and other signs of alcoholism, but supposedly no history of drinking. During preliminary observation, techs noted a red liquid coming from his butt. Assuming blood, it was tested. Came back as red wine and blood. Turned out the deceased was a closet alcoholic who had given himself enemas with whatever alcohol he had, in this case red wine. The doctors concluded he'd pierced part of his colon or rectum with whatever he'd enemaed himself with and led to a bleed. Working the ambulance for a barricaded male. After an hour of standby and trying not to fall asleep, a cop banged on our window frantically to call us into the house. A guy put his shotty in his mouth, but must have flinched at the last second and blew his face off. He was left with just a scream hole that was fluttering flaps of torn flesh, not unlike a predator mouth for a face. That was the only time I ever saw an ER nurse shriek at the sight of something. I worked briefly as a morgue assistant a few years back. The job mainly consisted of moving corpses and holding organs while the pathologist did his thing. By far the most what-the-frick-worthy death I've seen was a guy who'd been working in a factory, getting himself off by rubbing his eggplant on the underside of a high-speed conveyor belt that he was meant to be operating. He got caught and it tore off most of his crotch. Ruled as death by misadventure. He had bled out from a torn femoral artery before the paramedics even made it to the scene. And yes, I'm aware that there's a Darwin Award that's quite similar. That guy was in the US somewhere and lost just one of his little jewels. This guy was from the south of England and died. Presumably there's some crossover in the Venn diagram of clumsy preverts and factory deaths. Also, death by misadventure is the ruling for a death caused through non-malicious negligence or by accident in the execution of an otherwise legal act. I've seen quite a bit. Working at the OCME has been a summer job that's morphed into a side job while I've been in school. The top 3 most unusual calls I've been out on are as follows. 1. A man strung himself up, and when he jumped off his apartment balcony, he left so much slack that it just took his head off. His head was on one lady's balcony and his body was on the ground. When we were there, we couldn't find the head, so we had to knock on a couple of doors where the rope was hanging past in order to find it. 2. A man died of a heart attack while tickling his pickle. The responding officers left the naughty movie playing on the television just to make it awkward when I arrived. It was a cassette. And 3, another man was sitting on the railroad tracks at a railroad crossing to end his tenure on Earth by train, which is very messy and annoying to have to pick up, mind you. But a drunk driver was trying to catch air over the tracks and killed the guy, but it threw his body off the tracks before the train came over a couple of minutes later. And as a bonus, a man blasted himself in the noggin with a shotty in his bedroom, but left the ceiling fan on. You know the saying, crap hit the fan? Imagine brain matter hitting his. He basically repainted his walls with an interesting splatter pattern of brain matter and blood and pieces of his face. I tried to clean up as much as I could for the wife, although I'm not required to do any cleaning of the scene. I'm actually asked not to. Sometimes I just feel bad for people. Anyways, don't shoot yourself in the head until you turn off your fan, please. Oh boy, I do wonder if talking about these incidents in such casual terms is just something that people end up doing after a while on the job. I hope I never become familiar enough with these sorts of things to talk about them like this. Former biological anthropologist. As an undergrad, I worked for a forensic anthropologist. This is the weirdest case she had had that I got to see for myself. It was from the 1920s. My boss had inherited a coroner's collection of odd or interesting bones that he'd collected during his tenure in a major city. Back then, coroners could just take whatever they wanted from bodies without telling the families. If the family was poor or indigent or an immigrant minority, then they really helped themselves, sometimes taking the whole body. This coroner took a lot of stuff, even rearticulating some of the pieces, reconstructing how they looked when they were attached to the rest of the person. So anyway, she had this collection she inherited, and several of the pieces were designated what she calls death by testosterone poisoning. They didn't literally die of testosterone, but they all died because of stupid, risky, ridiculous actions. Think of the TV show Jackass, only with no monetary payout. The weirdest one was from early last century. A white man in his 40s who had died from sepsis from multiple arm fractures got in an arm wrestling contest. Why multiple fractures? Because even after cracking his humerus or upper arm bone, he couldn't bear losing. So he just wrapped it up with some kind of splint, had a guy hold the fracture, just a crack at that point, and went for best 2 out of 3, whereupon he snapped the humerus all the way through and broke his radius and ulna when he slammed his arm down on the edge of the table in anger. The preserved bones came with a whole story recounted in the coroner's notes. One of the lower arm bones, radius or ulna, I can't remember which, had protruded through the skin, and being too cheap or too stupid to see a doctor, the wound became gangrenous, and the infection entered his bloodstream. He died of septicemia a few weeks later. Looking at the bone, I could see all of the fractures as well as where the infection had attacked the periosteum and the bone itself, with no sign of healing. In short, stupid, pointless arm wrestling contest results in multiple arm fractures, gangrene, and death from septicemia. Labeled jokingly as death by testosterone poisoning by the owner of the anatomical collection the bones are a part of. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not a medical professional or a mortician, but I think this story is relevant to the question, so I'll share it anyway. A few weeks ago, I was driving a guy to a hospital 3 hours away. He was a truly amazing man and regaled me with a myriad of fascinating tales of his youth and previous jobs. He got on to explaining to his family how he had 2 nephews but now only had 1. I asked him what happened. Apparently, his eldest nephew, around 28, was riding his motorbike on a weekend out in the countryside here in the UK. They found him later that day, dead on the side of the road, on a corner, motorbike next to him, with no obvious signs of impact or anything that could possibly have led to his death. It took a long time for them to work out what had happened. Eventually, they found a small bruise about half an inch in width on his temple. After some investigation, they discovered that the corner of the road had just been resurfaced and had some loose stones on top. They concluded that as he rounded the corner at about 30 miles per hour, the bike had slid from underneath him. As he rolled to the side of the road, the footrest of the bike had entered the corner of the helmet, through the hole where the visor was open, and hit him in the temple, killing him instantly. Nothing reckless, no one involved, just bad luck. Sometimes that's all you need. I'm a nurse, and this 80-year-old man had fissures in his butt and was admitted to the ICU because he shoved an entire frozen D-cell-sized mag light up his butt and perforated his bowel. He went to surgery to have it removed and later died from septic shock. The mag light, however, survived. My ex-employer was a funeral director in Nebraska. He told some crazy stories. First, how he'd found a guy dead in his laundry room, glass bottle taped to the agitator on the washing machine. Broke when the guy attempted to stimulate himself by sitting on it. End result, all of his guts were in the wash tub. Second was the self-deletion by train. The guy basically shattered like a watermelon, but his brain landed perfectly intact between the tracks. Third was lots of horse screwing stories where guys are kicked to death and found with their pants off in the stables. And finally, drunk driving farm equipment never ends well. These were generally his answer to, "What's the coolest thing you've ever seen?" My ex-employer was a sociopath, if you haven't figured it out. My dad told us that once they had a guy bleeding out on the table from a stab wound. They stopped the bleeding, but his vitals were still taking a dive. Someone pointed out there was way too much blood. They turn him over, and it's coming out of his butt. Someone had stuck a light bulb up the guy's butt, broken it, and shanked him when he tried to escape, and the guy still escaped. They stabilized him, but he died of septic shock. This was told to us over dinner, mind you. My grandfather did some work as a doctor in Indonesia. He told us stories of people who had had pathogens living in them and eating them from the inside out, some in really grotesque ways. Some people had fungus on them that basically sucked their lives away. So, not a coroner, but it was still kind of interesting and gross. The short of it was, a man died from endometrial cancer. He had had a transplant prior. The woman who gave the transplant had metastatic cancer that had spread to said organ unknowingly. The guy survived the transplant, but cancer cells from the transplanted organ populated, and he ended up dying from her cancer. I was talking recently with a friend who was an undertaker at a funeral home for about a decade, sometime in the late 70s and early 80s. This was when they were in charge of collecting bodies directly from the scene. Someone driving on a country road in Oklahoma noticed a car out in the field. A teen girl, 16 or 17, was crying and screaming hysterically. Anyway, the car was a T-top Firebird or something like that. There was a headless body in the driver's seat, a head in the back seat, along with a guy who'd been split in half at the abdomen. This girl was hysterical, so they couldn't figure out what the heck had taken place here. It turns out the driver had been sticking his head up at the top of the car while driving, and the other guy was almost sitting on the top of the open T-top. They lost control and went off the road through a barbed wire fence. One or two of the wires went up over the top of the car and cleanly severed the driver's head and the passenger in half. My friend said it took them the better part of an hour to determine what had happened. Then he collected up the pieces and went on with his day. A man fell into a septic tank and died because of suffocation rather than drowning, found after 3 days. This was one autopsy my staff let me skip as I started to retch the moment I opened the door to the autopsy site, despite wearing an airtight mask. Yeah, there's a certain amount of indignity that I just don't want to see other deceased humans in, thank you very much. Honestly, even just reading this makes me feel real bad. Ugh. Okay, so the narrator is coming back in editing to tell you that the next 2 minutes 10 seconds are one of the most awful medical stories that I've done in my time on the channel. You've been warned. Here is a second-hand experience of something my cousin went through a few years ago. It's the frickin' weirdest thing that I've ever heard, and it's worth a retelling. I need to share this with more people. So my cousin and his best bud from med school wound up at the same hospital. His friend became a mortician, and my cousin is a proctologist. One morning, my cousin gets a call from a patient he had an appointment with later that day. The patient is asking the secretary if he could come in early. His issue was getting far worse. When asked what was wrong, he refused to explain and demanded to speak with my cousin. Now, my cousin has a terrific bedside manner, the best I've ever seen. He makes it a point to speak with his patients whenever they need to. So he gets on the phone with this guy, and the guy was just pleading with him. So my cousin had an opening and told the patient to come in during that time. The patient comes in and was sitting in the exam room. Cousin walks into the room and asks him what's wrong. Patient proceeds to strip fully undressed, get on all fours and sticks his butt out at my cousin while on top of the exam table. The guy began to explain how his butt keeps leaking crap and it hurts real bad. Except my cousin apparently immediately saw that he wasn't leaking crap at all. The guy was leaking half of his goddamn intestines. Like, half a foot of intestines was just protruding from this guy's butt and would throb and pulsate with every breath that the patient took. At this point, I wish I could say my cousin got the guy the help he needed, but before my cousin could do anything, the guy just screamed, "Just yank this goddamn crap out of me, man! Get it out!" As he reached behind himself and yanked his gosh damn intestines so hard that his butthole erupted with a fountain of blood, coating the nurse and my cousin. That was apparently the most inhuman scream that Stephen, my cousin, had ever heard that day. The guy was in so much pain after yanking everything out that he passed out and fell off the exam table, smashing his head on the corner of the chair, dying instantly. So, cue Stephen's best friend, the mortician, did an autopsy, and the cause of death was pretty straightforward, all things considered. Apparently his friend found an unraveled slinky string throughout the patient's digestive tract. Like the guy took a slinky, ate it while straightening the metal out. All in all, makes me shake in anxiety just thinking about the whole thing. Oh. My goal is to not end up in a video like this when I die. I want to die in a normal way. I always found the death of Gloria Ramirez to be fascinating. Not as much in how she died, but what happened to those around her in that final hour. Staff reported magenta-colored particles in her blood just before nurses started fainting. After the third one passed out, they ended up evacuating the ER, leaving behind just a skeleton crew that tried to stabilize Ramirez unsuccessfully. The faintings and symptoms exhibited by the staff are considered to be mass hysteria to this day. My weirdest case was this one guy who decided not to be alive anymore. It wasn't hard to figure out, but the weird part was that he and his friends were having some sort of self-deletion race. Like who could finish things first. We realized that this guy, 21 I believe, had taken a wild cocktail of substances and booze. That was his third attempt that week. We saw that our pedestrian-verse train from a week before was one of the other friends in this pact. Don't commit to finishing things by train, people. It's really messy, and we have to walk like half a mile of tracks to make sure we found you all. Plus you're forcing the conductor to live through something that will haunt him forever. But the thing that made me mad was that this guy knew he was trying to finish his mortal affairs, yet he wore 3 damn pairs of pants. And I was in charge of undressing the body. We couldn't cut the clothes off in case the family wanted them or something. Undressing a body that's already in rigor is hard to begin with. He had a pair of jeans, then a pair of Superman pajama pants, and underneath those a pair of Charlie Brown Christmas boxers. In February. I swear he did it just to annoy the morgue worker, and that happened to be me. Another one was a guy who tied off his life story by purposefully slamming into the Jersey wall on the highway. Car stopped, his body stopped, and his heart kept going. Completely transected and fell into his thoracic cavity. Then the car burst into flames. So we had a super crispy critter that came in. He was in burn position and completely blackened to a charcoal-like state. His brain looked like a hard-boiled egg, and his blood coagulated into blood jello. That was a mess. All because his girlfriend dumped him. My mum was an ME for years, and she has a handful of interesting stories. As a kid, I grew up on pictures of cadavers, and she'd sometimes ask me to go over her reports to verify that her point was getting across. Because if a 14-year-old can understand it, so can a 40-year-old, right? Anyway, I remember 2 specific instances that brought horror to my young brain and sheer joy to hers. First was a guy who ended things via throttling himself on his wife's undies, and then there was the motorcyclist who accidentally ramped himself into some woods. His head was twisted around all demon-like. What my mum was so excited to show me was that his legs, because it was a 1 in a million case. The guy had gone spread eagle and perfectly struck 2 trees on each side of him, basically snapping off his legs. My mum was so excited. "Isn't that cool?" she exclaimed, I remember vividly. What's the most terrifying thing you saw in the safety of your own home? Somebody tried to break into the house while I was by myself. The whole place was quiet and dark at nighttime. I walked past the front door to go upstairs for bed, and the handle suddenly started jerking around like the Hulk was trying to get in. Then whoever it was started to either kick or shoulder the door, and it was making the whole frame jiggle. I completely froze and my mind went blank. I was just standing there like an idiot and staring. My dog bolted down the stairs like it was her time to shine, scrambled on the tiles, and let loose the most vicious barks I've ever heard. Whoever it was left. She was a very good girl. I miss her. When I was young, I came home from a party in the middle of the night when my dad was out of town. I started making a midnight quesadilla when I heard someone cough in the basement. I yelled and ran outside, and they took off through the backyard. I came to find out my dad's ex-girlfriend's daughter stole her key to our house and came to rob us. She was busted a couple of years later doing this to her sister-in-law. I was just chilling on the couch, doing whatever, when suddenly a really heavy person started sprinting in our attic. Sounded like steel-toed boots and everything. I'm a really small woman, so I immediately freaked out, thinking there was a gigantic man stomping around my home. Then the screaming starts. Literal frickin' screaming. Like something from The Exorcist, and there's multiple voices. I snuck outside and cried, extremely shaken, and called the cops. Guess what's in my attic? Not a big grapey grapist. No, it's raccoons. Also, the raccoons were mating. That's what the screaming was coming from. I went crying to the cops about randy raccoons. I was home for the weekend from uni, but my parents and siblings were away, so I was home alone. Our house is quite a bit secluded, with a church and graveyard next door, and closest neighbours up the street but quite a bit away. I had all of the doors locked, and I was settling down to watch a movie when the doorbell started ringing, so I went to answer it. There was no one there. Then the back doorbell rang, and no one was there again. This keeps happening over and over, and it's pitch black outside. Then whoever it was began banging on the windows and yelling. At this point I'm freaking out, so I begin to call the police and yell at the people outside that I've called them, when it turns out it's a couple of fellas from uni playing a prank on me. I was terrified and reduced to tears at this point, but they thought it was hilarious. They did a few more things like that to me over the 2 to 3 years I was at uni with them, and I always thought of them as friends. I'm older and wiser now to know that they're just C-words. I was home alone one night while my wife and son were visiting my mother-in-law. I walked back to our bedroom to see someone rummaging through my son's room on the video baby monitor. I immediately grabbed my Glock and yelled at the other side of the house, "I'm armed, come out slowly," over and over while slowly making my way to his room. I got there, flipped on the light, and nothing. Searched the whole house, pumped full of adrenaline. Finally satisfied I was alone, I went back to my room and the guy was back in the room. I took a closer look, and I'm ashamed to say I was looking at myself. The camera is a live feed on our Wi-Fi, and it was streaming on a huge delay. I've never known it to do that, and it hasn't done it since. In short, went looking for myself and came back empty-handed. This was written in 2020, and I have to say that I don't know which part of the world you are living in for the internet to be that slow, even during a hurricane or some such. I mean, the presence of the firearm would imply the US, but that connection speed sounds like outback Australia. I was about 21 or 22 and living by myself at the time, and I left my window open on a pleasant night. It was low enough to the ground that you could get in if you really tried, but the screen wasn't easy to take off. and I lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, so I didn't even think twice about it. I woke up in the middle of the night because I smelled smoke, and I reached up to turn on my lamp, and my hand hit what was very obviously a person. My brain fully woke up at that point, and I realized there was a shirtless man in my bedroom smoking a cigarette and staring at me. And I remember yelling for him to get out, and I must have spooked him just as badly as he spooked me, because he leapt out of my window and took off. I slammed it shut and moved a bookcase in front of it, and when I went out the next morning in the daylight, I found the screen sitting against the house. I did not sleep the rest of the night, and I haven't slept with a window more than cracked ever since. I absolutely refuse to live on the ground floor of a building now. I don't know if he was planning to rob me or commit the unspeakable act or both, but it was definitely terrifying and makes me wonder how many times it happened that I didn't wake up for. A few years back, I was home alone during a power storm. I went into the bathroom to take a dump, and at the exact time I was crapping, I sneezed. Well, the power went out at the same time. The house was pitch black, and I literally thought I crapped myself blind. I couldn't see my hands, so in a panic I was yelling, "No, this can't be true! It's impossible!" I was in a panic, feeling for the toilet paper to wipe and flush. After completing that task, I just sat on the loo, trying to figure out how to tell everyone I knew that I'd literally crapped myself blind by sneezing while crapping. After about 2 minutes of complete darkness and dread and panic, lightning struck outside and lit up my hallway. That was the best feeling ever. Not exactly alone, but I was in my home with my newborn son and someone knocked on the front door. I was expecting my mother, but she usually comes in through the garage. I thought it was strange, but I yelled, "Come in," because why wouldn't I? Then this old woman, off her head, comes stumbling through the door and asks me for a ride to the nearest gas station. I told her that I didn't have a car seat for my son, so I couldn't go anywhere, and she just started screaming, "That's just inappropriate!" and doesn't stop yelling even when I'm telling her that she needs to leave or I'll call the cops. After a minute or so, my mother actually pulls into the driveway. The smackhead sees the car and bolts out the door. I never see her again. That night, my truck got broken into. I can't say for sure whether it was the same woman, but I gave her description to the cops anyway. When I was 19 in my first apartment, I had someone knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw this burly, heavy-set man who abruptly started screaming to let him in. He was screaming things like he was going to beat my butt, kick down the door if I didn't open. I called the cops, and as soon as someone got on the phone, he started body slamming the door to break in. I was freaking out and crying, but luckily 5 cops showed up within 5 minutes. As soon as he heard the sirens, he quickly walked away and they met him at the bottom of the stairs. Apparently he was a previous renter but was extremely intoxicated. They arrested him and thankfully he never came back. I ended up breaking my lease and moving out 3 months later. It was in a very nice neighborhood, but it quickly made me wish I was back home with my family instead of being on the other side of the United States. My mom had something similar happen to her a year or so ago. She lives in a high-rise and all of the floors look identical in the hall. A drunk man tried to get into her apartment and started yelling and screaming at her to let him in. She called the building security and they came to deal with him. He lived a couple of floors above her. I lit 2 long taper candles for some ambience while I was playing guitar late at night. I was facing the other direction, looking out at the window while playing, and shortly after turned around and went back towards the candles and discovered one of them was completely gone. The stand was still there, but no melted wax, just a bare candle holder, and the other one was still lit and no shorter than it had been when I lit them. It was almost 3 a.m. and I was so terrified that I got in my car and left and drove to my dad's house. When I was like 14, I was home alone one night and around 10 p.m. stood up in my kitchen making some cereal. It was dark outside and then all of a sudden, the loudest sound. Some drunk woman literally launched a hammer through my kitchen window. It was so loud and glass was everywhere. I followed her down the street while calling the cops. It was pretty strange. For those wondering why I'd follow a vandal, she looked like a very fragile old smackhead lady. She could barely walk or see straight and she started stumbling away mumbling some crap once she had done it. Plus I didn't really know how the frick I was going to explain this crap to my parents if I didn't have a solid answer. But yeah, it was a very distressing walk while following her. Definitely an action caused by adrenaline as well. One afternoon, someone knocked at my back door. I thought it was the guy coming to read AmITheA, so I opened the door. Next thing I know, 2 huge guys pushed into the house and one of them threw me up against the wall. Then they shoved me down on the couch. They told me they were Hell's Angels and they were angry because my boyfriend was selling too much, cutting into their profits. They kept calling me by my next-door neighbor's name. We'd suspected they were selling smack before. All of the people passing by that place for less than 5 minutes made it pretty obvious. I just kept telling them I wasn't her. One of them searched the house while the other one kept me pinned to the couch. They started to realize they were in the wrong house because they couldn't find anything where they were told it was. My neighbor's house is a single floor with a basement. My house is a 4-level, back split. Then I showed them my mail because it showed my name and they knew they messed up. They started telling me that they were after my neighbor's boyfriend because he committed the unspeakable act on their cousin, which I knew was BS by now, but I didn't care, I just wanted them to leave. They robbed me of my cash and left. I now have locks on my screen door. Huh. Well, although it was bullcrap that you got robbed even though they picked the wrong house, I'd honestly still say you might have gotten off lightly, all things considered. Glad that you were all right. I was asleep while home alone. When I turned over in bed, I casually opened my eyes a little whilst turning, and they were shut again just as quickly. In that split second, I could have sworn I'd seen a man stood at the bottom of my bed. I laid still, awake with my eyes closed, trying to act like I was awake, and listening for any sound in the room for someone breathing or moving. I couldn't hear anything. I was too scared to open my eyes and look, and consoled myself that there wasn't any way someone could have gotten in without me hearing a window smash, and I fell back asleep. When I got up in the morning, the front door was open. They didn't take anything and left no signs of being there. It was still very creepy though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've lived on my own a long time and I don't get scared easily. I just finished reading in bed and I turned my lamp off and settled down to go to sleep and hugged my cat up close to me. This would be about 1:30 in the morning. I closed my eyes and I heard a voice saying, meow, like imitating a cat. My window was open though, so I thought it was just someone being weird outside. I opened my eyes and in the middle of my bedroom was a small boy wearing a red jumper waving his arms above his head. I leapt up like a goddamn ninja and put the light on. There was now nothing there. My heart was going mad. Now, nothing paranormal has happened in this house over the entire time I've lived there. I spent the whole night totally freaked out, only getting a bit of sleep when it started to get light again. My friends thought this was hilarious when I told them. I was saying that there's no way I'm living in a haunted house, and I started Googling cleansing, exorcists, and whatnot. The next few nights, other weird stuff started happening. I started sleeping with the TV on, and as soon as I tried to get any sleep, I'd hear freaky voices coming from it, or I'd notice shadows dip by the sides of my bed. It was dreadful. I actually resorted to saying out loud, "I'm really tired, so if you could not haunt me for one night, I'd be really grateful." I'd never believed in any of this sort of stuff before, so it was like an entire paradigm shift for me. Anyway, I was going on about this to my friends at work, and one of them asked if I was on substances. Well, funnily enough, I just started taking this new tablet, Montelukast, for my asthma. When I got home, I read the side effects, and a rare one was hallucinations. I stopped taking them, no more hauntings. In short, medication made me see ghosts. I got a 5-channel sound system. Nothing too fancy, but the best I'd ever had. I watched an action film and heard the creaking door to my left in the distance. I had to clear my home as I thought there was an intruder. Nope, just better stereo sound. I had the police knock one day while I was alone. The cop had a guy in the back of his car who said we were holding his friend captive. I showed the cop my ID and explained it was just me and my husband. He wasn't home, but they could look if they wanted to. The cop said, "No, that's okay," and then asked questions about my neighbors. And that's how you got away with murder. The cleaning lady tried to self-delete in our bathroom. She died 4 days later. My boyfriend worked away from home a lot, and I always struggled to sleep on the first night he was away. On this occasion, I was woken by the sound of a man shouting and then someone banging on wood or a front door. I jumped up and looked out my bedroom window, just in time to see a man dressed all in black walking through our garden toward the house. I ran to the front of the house to look out the front window and made sure he kept going. He did, but he met up with another man dressed in black walking towards my house as well. I was terrified and I called the cops. They arrived in a matter of minutes and checked out the back garden, but the guys were gone. Turned out a neighbor had caught them both trying to steal his car, and one had escaped through the gardens while the other had run through the roads, and they'd met up outside my house. I didn't sleep at all that night, and my brother came to stay the next one. I'm so glad I live in an apartment now. Much more security. I work from home, so I'm home alone a lot. One day I was working, and out of the corner of my eye I noticed some movement in my backyard. There was a man jumping over my fence. Panicked, I call my then boyfriend, now fiancé, and tell him what's happening. While I was on the phone with him, I got a knock at my front door. It's a woman from CenturyLink informing me that technicians will need access to my backyard. I tell her someone just jumped my fence, so I think they're already there. Way to give me a heart attack, CenturyLink. Sleep paralysis. Waking up from a nightmare soaked in sweat with a weight on my chest and completely unable to move. Sometimes I see shadowy shapes or feel there's someone watching. I get auditory hallucinations when I'm tired that's brought on by my anxiety. The one that caused the worst anxiety attack I'd had in months was just as I was drifting off to sleep, a guy yelled, "Hey!" right in my ear, and I launched myself out of the bed before realizing what had happened. You know those tongs in the kitchen that have a spring but a latch to keep them together? I had a pair of those and I put the latch on and put them down on the counter. I went away for a bit and came back and they jumped off the counter at me. Biggest jump scare of my life. The latch had come undone and they sprung open. But in the millisecond when inanimate objects suddenly come to life and jump at you, you don't realize this and totally freak out. The narrator has a stainless steel kitchen unit that pops violently between slightly convex and concave when he puts hot pots on it. And let me tell you, going from peacefully cooking to having the bejesus scared out of you when there's a bang and all of your kitchen implements hop off the unit is pretty damn scary. I was living alone after my ex-husband moved out, and the creepy guy across the street, who was 20 years my senior and enjoyed a variety of substances, kept trying to date me. He would not leave me alone when I left my house or arrived home, and he'd threatened to commit the unspeakable act on me. I just started dating my current boyfriend, and he helped hang up motion-detecting lights outside. I started carrying pepper spray and leaving the alarm on whenever I was home. My boyfriend and I also agreed that if I didn't text him for a certain period of time and he couldn't get a hold of me, that he'd go to my house and check up on things. I also CC'd him on my work calendar just in case. It got so scary that my boyfriend actually moved in a lot sooner than we'd planned because I felt so unsafe. After the creepy guy watched my boyfriend move in and saw him pottering around with project cars in the driveway, he stopped and moved away a few months later. I've never felt so unsafe in my own home, wondering if our outside lights had turned on because of the neighbor's cat or because creepy guy was trying to break in. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key in our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now, this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he'd returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking that he hadn't heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I got the feeling that something wasn't quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, she'd spent the entire evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. "Dad? Is that you? Please respond, was repeating in my head, but the silence continued. Now, at this point I was freaking out and literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly got up and started walking towards the other end of the room, which led to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and begin opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. And I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mum, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of the house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me she thought my dad had come home as well, as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time, as we were still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he hadn't come back earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. One day while I was working afternoons a couple of years back, I woke up around 10 a.m. and started to watch American Dad before getting up. Next thing you know, I hear my back door open, a normal thing in our home since we only use the back door. But nobody was supposed to be home yet. I assumed it was my mum and didn't think anything of it. Then I heard the footprints coming up the stairs as my bedroom was on the second floor. I called out to my mum and got no response. Then my door cracked open and a head popped in. It was a 30-year-old man with a blonde beard and a big mane of greasy hair who looks so shocked to see me. At the time, I was about 260 pounds, 6'3" and 20 years old. I was also sitting in only my boxers. Before I was able to realize what was happening, he asked, "Is this the Paulson residence?" To which I reply, "No?" He makes a swift exit, and before I can recollect my thoughts, he's not even in my driveway. I talked to a family friend who's a veteran cop. Turns out this man has been pulling this kind of stunt to rob people in nearby towns. A few years ago, I was home alone in my basement playing video games when I hear the door that connects my kitchen to the garage creak open and slam shut, but I never heard the actual mechanical garage door open. Then I heard heavy footsteps of someone wearing boots walk the length of my kitchen directly above me. I originally thought, my brother must have forgot something, as he had left about 5 minutes before that for work. So I was about to yell up to him to make fun of him, but something in the back of my mind was telling me, hold on, something's not quite right here. So I muted my TV to hear better and stay quiet. Then I heard the footsteps turn around and walk back to the door, and again I hear it creak open and slam shut. But again, I never heard the actual mechanical garage door open or close. So I walk slowly upstairs, thinking maybe my brother just forgot to close the garage door. I slowly open the door to my garage and see that the garage door has been closed the entire time. The only two explanations I can come up with are either something paranormal happened, or someone broke into my house, walked through my kitchen, and left without taking anything, whilst also not letting me hear them open my garage door. In my opinion, both are equally terrifying to me. What's the stupidest argument you've ever gotten dragged into for way too long? Fighting with my brother about which fruit would win if they were sentient and could fight. My wife and I got into a shouting match as to whose friend's wedding we would attend if they scheduled them for the same weekend. Neither of those friends was even engaged yet, by the way. When I was 6, my friend and I stood facing each other, arguing about which hand was your left and which was your right. It took us about 5 minutes to realize that when standing opposite someone, your left is their right. I was living with a pal and we were getting on each other's nerves. One night we were arguing about whether to break spaghetti noodles in half. I finally said, "You cook yours your way, broken, and I'll cook mine unbroken." He took half of the spaghetti from the package and broke the noodles in half. He put them in boiling water and started stirring, while I stood there with the package. Mostly we glared at each other, and then he reminded me to add my half to the pot. After I did it, he then thought of something. How are we gonna separate the long noodles from the short ones? We argued about the color of lobsters before being cooked. They only catch the red ones for eating. Duh. I had an ex argue with me over which would weigh more, a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers. We went back and forth forever while I tried to explain it to her. It didn't help when her mother chimed in with, "What about a pound of wet feathers?" The apple does not fall far from the tree, apparently. Oh no, her mother knew what she was doing. She tossed a grenade into the conversation and walked away. Way back when I was a phone service advisor for a credit card company, this lady called in confused as heck about a piece of mail we'd sent her. "I don't understand why you sent me a bill. I paid for the TV at the store with my card." "Yes, ma'am. Now, this is the bill for using your credit card." "But I used my credit card. Why would I have to pay again?" This went on for about a good hour. This poor excuse for an adult believed that a credit card was just an all-access pass to buy anything you wanted for free. That was a devastating job. A couple of years later, after being promoted, I was processing some emails to customers and received an email asking, "How do I email customer service?" You just did. My wife and I got into a screaming match because our broccoli wasn't growing as well as we thought it should, and clearly it was the other person's fault. Marriage, where the big things matter less and the little things are explosive. "Honey, I got fired." "That's okay, sweetie, we'll work through this together." "Honey, I moved the cereal to the left side of the pantry." "Are you freaking kidding me, Sean? The right side is clearly more easily accessible. I want a divorce!" This feels very true for a lot of relationships I've seen. Contrary to the saying, couples do in fact seem to not so much sweat the small stuff as go into a screaming frenzy about it, while remaining strong and united against major outside factors. The arguments you have where someone's venting at you about something infuriating and you even agree with them, but they're so mad that they want to argue with you about it, even though you agree with them and say yes throughout the conversation. My friend once tried to argue that Token, the black character in South Park, was named as such because black people are stereotypically always toking on Mary J. and Smack. I argued that it was because he was the token black character. My friend and I are both smokers. We were talking to my other friend who wasn't. The non-smoking friend was saying how bad smoking is and that we should both quit, and my smoking friend was arguing that smoking wasn't bad for you at all and he had no reason to quit. Now, at first, I thought he was joking, but no, he was deadly serious. I informed him he was wrong and that smoking does indeed kill people, and he got angry, screamed that we were lying, and then left and hasn't spoken to me since. This was like 6 years ago. No, he's not dead, he's just stupid. Not me, but my parents. They got into an argument about a little bit of sauce getting wasted because it came out too fast. My dad got angry about it because he just quit smoking, and they haven't spoken to each other for nearly 2 days now. My parents go on YouTube too, so I hope they see this and realize how stupid they're being. At the deli in grocery stores, you can buy these cherry peppers that are stuffed with prosciutto and cheese. Well, my dad and I love these things, and one day he bought a bunch of them. Then, through the course of a week, we ate them all. Except one, which sat in the container for 3 days uneaten. So, I ate it, and that's where I went wrong. 2 weeks went by before my dad would speak to me again, simply because I ate the last pepper before he did. My friend tooted. I asked him, "Did you just fart?" "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't, you fricking liar." Silence and a horrible smell. He was the only one with me in that room, and he is known for lying. "Oh, he didn't fart. He crapped himself." "Oh God, no." I once got in an argument with my roommate about who could raise the fastest duck. I was in a fraternity in college, and a sorority had invited us to participate in a rubber duck race fundraiser where the rubber ducks would float down a creek through campus and the person that bought the winning duck got a prize. Being the smart aleck I am, I asked the sorority president if I could enter a real duck. She didn't believe I would and said, "Yeah, sure, whatever, John." Later that night, my roommate and I got drunk and got in a heated debate over who could raise the faster duck. We woke up the next morning and headed to the nearest poultry farm where we each bought a duckling and raised it for the next month and a half. Their names were Cheese and Quackers, naturally. One day I came home to find all sorts of witchcraft spellbooks strewn about our counter. I asked him what they were, and he opened one up, grabbed my duck and started cursing it. Apparently he had gone to a palm reader to seek advice as a joke. We kept them in our fenced-in backyard, and the day after he had cursed my duck, a storm blew down our fence and our ducks escaped. I still blame the voodoo curse to this day. My duck, Quackers, easily would have won, and he had to resort to consulting the great beyond to ruin the entire race for both of us. In short, I had the faster duck, but I was foiled by a curse. My friend was convinced selfish was pronounced shellfish. I wrote the word out, sounded it out, and it was like I was saying the sun was blue. She just wouldn't have it. I don't know if she was screwing with me, but 2 or 3 years after that whole argument, we got in a whole different thing about her basically being a witch, and she says, "Sorry, I was being shellfish." I couldn't stay mad at that moron, and no, I'm not friends with Sean Connery. The argument he was defending was that if you go on someone's property, you're their property. Needless to say, he isn't very bright. He's locked up in my garage now. A woman I used to work with at a university got into an argument with me because she didn't believe the different races of humans were in fact the same species. Her final argument? "No, you're wrong. It's like whites and Native Americans are just like fish and dolphins. They're both in the ocean, but not the same species. Now do you get it?" No, not really. And not at all coincidentally, this was the worst group of co-workers I've ever had. A conversation between Jane, Bill, and I. Jane said, "It was about -40 outside in the winters." Bill asked, "Celsius or Fahrenheit?" So I piped in, "Oh, they're actually the same at -40. "Really?" said Jill. But no, Bill had to weigh in, "No, they aren't. You're talking crap." I said, "I'm 99% sure that they are the same at -40. I have a physics degree. You're an idiot." Bill then went on to reference my idiocy twice more over the course of the evening. Bill is a C-word, and no one likes to talk to him at parties. My friend's car battery died, and I suggested we push-start it. In Ireland, where the vast majority of cars are manual, every person in the country has once been beckoned to push-start a car. My friend said, "No, you can't push-start a car," and eventually started calling me an idiot and all sorts. She was so adamant that she was correct, she rang a mutual friend, a mechanic, and asked him the question, and he replied, "Of course you can push a car. Who the frick is saying you can't?" If she's like half the other people in these stories, I'm surprised you found out the truth, as most of these people would just hang up the phone and claim that the person agreed with them. Because there's a whole bunch of denial going on in these stories. When did people get so sure of themselves? Be curious, folks. My cousin said that her laptop was overheating and making a buzzing sound. Her friend piped up and commented that it was definitely a virus and she should take it to Geek Squad to have it removed. I said, no, it's not a virus, it's probably your fan. Your fan is messed up, it's probably just dusty, just try cleaning that out. Note that I'm not an IT professional, but come on. This girl got righteously ticked off and told me that, no, it was a virus and she knows because she had the same issue with her laptop a few months ago and Geek Squad fixed it. This went back and forth a bit with me insisting that a virus doesn't affect the fan function. It was literally a hardware issue and she was talking to me like she couldn't believe how fricking stupid I was to not realize that a virus was making my cousin's laptop fan bog down. I finally explained to her how viruses work and she stomped her foot like a child and exploded that, "It's still a virus! The virus just deleted the file that runs the fan." I stared at her in disbelief. The file that runs the fan? What is that? Fan.exe? And she said, "Finally, you get it." She was so convinced that this was the case that my cousin, not noted for her critical thinking skills, believed her and said she'd just take the laptop in to have it checked and cleaned. Whatever, you want to pay out the butt to have some smug D-bag at Geek Squad, quote, fix your laptop? It ain't my business. My friend said, if you're driving 60 kilometers per hour, you're driving 1 kilometer per minute. I said, no, you're driving almost 2 kilometers per minute. She snapped back, are you on smack or something? You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. That human blood is blue before it hits oxygen, which is why your veins are blue. This led to 5th grade me poking myself with pins for hours to see if I could see it change from blue to red, while my brother kept me at it by telling me I wasn't doing it fast enough. God damn older brothers. I had an extended argument about whether or not Oregon Trail, the game, promoted communism. Like, this was 20 to 30 minutes of arguing. No, it doesn't. You would say that, you frickin' commie. That lake water is wetter than pool water. At my old job, I'd gone to get something off the printer, and when I got back to my desk, the director came over to me and pulled me into his office for a word. Jenny, you need to make sure you're wearing shoes. I am wearing shoes. You weren't just then when you walked to the printer. Yes, I was. No, you weren't. I saw that you weren't wearing shoes. Please make sure you're wearing shoes in my office. It's for health and safety. I was wearing shoes. No, you weren't. Yes, I was. I was wearing shoes. No, you weren't. Why wouldn't I be wearing shoes? Why would I take off my shoes to go to the printer and then immediately put them back on when I get to my desk? Listen, just make sure you're wearing shoes at all times. I'm still baffled. I was wearing my freaking shoes. Oh, and here's a bonus, equally stupid argument. I was about 13, and me and my friend were watching TV at her house. An advert came on for Go Ahead biscuits. My friend said, those taste disgusting. Yeah, I agreed. Have you even tried them? Yes. I hadn't, but I didn't want to admit my lie. No, you haven't. Yes, I have. All right then, what do they taste like? Disgusting. You haven't even tried them. Yes, I have. This angered her for some reason, so she slapped me and I slapped her back. That was harder, she said, hitting me back harder, and I hit her back even harder. We spent the next 10 minutes hitting each other, progressively getting harder and more violent until we'd both fallen off the sofa and were full-on scrapping on the floor. There were tears, bruises, it was vicious. We didn't speak for about 2 hours after that until we eventually realized how ridiculous it all was and started laughing hysterically, and then we cried some more, and then we hugged. That may top the shoes argument, in fairness. One day, my girlfriend was a huge jerk all day, treating me like crap, yelling at me, and then finally saying, well, at least I didn't kiss another person while we were together. Dumbstruck, I asked her when that happened. She said, yesterday at your friend's party. That's weird, I went to school and then work and then came over and we went to bed. It was at this point that we realized it was a dream. Thanks, lady. A phone number I frequently call ends in 6272. I remember that by dialing NASA. Friends of mine vehemently disagreed and said that I was dialing the wrong number. The correct number was Napa. They're the same letters on those numbers on the keypad. My dad and I got into a yelling match about who tooted in the car. There were only 2 of us in the car as well. He tooted and he won using the "I'll ground you" trump card. My friend tried to put aluminium foil in the microwave, so I and literally every other person we asked, from friends to complete strangers, tried to explain that it wouldn't end well. They strongly believed, and I quote, "It just makes a little light show in the microwave." Some people have pointed out you can put it in for a short time, so I'll add some more context. My friend wanted to put food on top of aluminium foil and then put it in the microwave for 30 to 60 seconds, because at the time we had no plate and he thought aluminium foil would work. Any of the theoretical arguments my wife and I have from time to time. For example, we recently had an argument about how we'd furnish the non-existent, hypothetical 8-bedroom mansion we'd live in if we were billionaires. She wanted it to be full of antiques, and I wanted a stylish and futuristic minimalist theme. My college roommate and I didn't speak for 3 weeks because of an argument regarding toilet paper roll placement. It started off as a discussion, then an argument, then got to the point where he called my sister a working girl and I broke his wrist. Over. The toilet roll goes over. One of my colleagues thought that beef came from a pig. Are you fricking serious? You know, the hamburger has a lot to answer for in modern society. I swear it set back a lot of children and at least one adult on what animal goes in what meat. My mum's a super religious and superstitious person, so whenever I'd say something negative, we'd have to cancel it by saying, "Cancel, cancel, cancel," so that whatever bad thing we said wouldn't come true. So one day my sister did something stupid and 12-year-old me said, "You're stupid and I hope you die." My mum heard me from the other room and screamed at me, "Cancel it!" I said, "No." "Cancel it 3 times. "Fine. Cancel." I said 3 times, mister. "No." "Cancel it 2 more. "Cancel. 1 more. Just a long pause from me. "Go to your room, you're grounded." "Cancel, cancel, cancel. I'm sorry, Mum, please." So yeah. I was a vegan for a few years and joined a club kinda organization. We'd swap recipes, talk about new products, and just hang out. Most of the people were pretty awesome, but like any group of people, some of them were a bit loony. There was this one girl who thought all animals could choose to be vegan. In her opinion, a wolf could just decide one day, "I want to avoid animal products." So she'd talk about wanting to go to speak to wild animals about the benefits of a vegan diet. I tried to tell her that animals really couldn't just go vegan, and she suggested that we feed them soy-based meat alternatives. We all tried to help her understand that animals can't, and she refused to believe us. She eventually stopped coming to the get-togethers. Thankfully, she refused to own pets, so no animals directly suffered from her beliefs. They just had to listen to her talk when she went out converting. I once argued with a girlfriend about whether or not we were going to have an argument. My girlfriend got angry at me because apparently I was mean to her in a dream. My friend and I got into an argument over whether chocolate would kill my dog. Of course, I was arguing that it would kill the dog, and he was arguing that it wouldn't. Eventually, he went home and I went to bed. Woke up to my dog vomiting violently under the bed. I could smell chocolate. That monumental idiot. I rushed my dog to the vet and he needed to know how much chocolate my dog may have ingested. I called my friend, but he denied feeding my dog any. He had 80% dark chocolate when he was over. My other friend was in the car with him when I called. Apparently he turned to her after hanging up the phone and said, I might have fed him a couple of squares to prove my point. My dog ended up in intensive care at the vet's for days. On an IV and carefully watched, he pulled through. The vet said that throwing up the chocolate so quickly undoubtedly saved his life. The stupid argument that almost cost my dog his life. Needless to say, I'm no longer friends with that jerk. My colleague and I spent half a day arguing about what would be best, burp confetti or fart glitter. Thank you, Internet, for giving us wonderful things. Men in Tights vs. Princess Bride. Dude, that's like saying, do you want tacos or nachos tonight? Just have tacos with a side of nachos. One doesn't have to be the best. When I was about 14, I got in an argument with a classmate about whether or not the sun was burning. I said it wasn't because the definition of burning is a reaction with oxygen. Nuclear fusion is not burning. I couldn't convince him. His anger increased until he almost became violent, but I couldn't let this go. Some teacher overheard this argument and sent us to the physics teacher to solve the issue. Huh. Well, this sent me on an interesting learning journey. The narrator went on a bit of an internet binge and can say it all comes down to what your definition of a burn is. But in most strictly scientific descriptions, burning entails combustion, and most of the sun's heat is the product of a huge nuclear reaction. And even then, the narrator with his history degree doesn't feel like he's qualified enough to defend his viewpoint further. An "I'm breaking up with you" April Fool's joke led to the real thing, and I'm glad that it did. I once argued with a drunk guy who was telling me it took years for the light from the sun to reach the earth. I had a computer science teacher who didn't know anything about technology. We got into arguments because she insisted that a degree in creative writing would be the best way to prepare yourself for an IT job rather than a degree in computer science. 30 FPS versus 60 FPS. My buddy and I smoked a bunch of green herb, then had an argument while watching the Food Network at 10 a.m. instead of going to our class. Is it touche or touchette? We frickin' had it out, telling each other why our version was correct, and more importantly, why the other party was gayer than 8 guys giving down-under kisses to 9 guys. We brawled in the living room for like 20 minutes. Oh sure, we could have just gone into the other room and Googled it, but these roasted potatoes with scallion and honey mustard vinaigrettes looked frickin' ridiculous. Could you believe Guy Fieri's fridge has a racing stripe? Man. Eventually, we decided who cares and put on Mario Kart. But I mean, secretly I knew he was wrong because, in my mind, of course it has a silent T, it's French is such a dumb argument. I miss college. When my daughter was 3, we were driving home together from the park and Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven came on the radio. She told me to change the station, it was a bad song, and I told her, no, it's the best song ever, you should listen to it. She then proceeded to tell me, I hate this song. I was like, you're 3, this is the best song ever, and you don't know anything about it. Oh my god, I'm arguing with a 3-year-old. We got home and she took a nap. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.